And we're live. We should be broadcasting on this beautiful fucking nearly 100-degree weather day on the 22nd of July 2018. This is Shit Shooting Sunday. The show designed to have a free-form discussion that will piss everyone off. So we have a few people that might be showing up. We have possibly Sarcasm and Liberty on Twitter, also possibly the Mad Libertarian on Twitter. We have possibly Finian Cornelison, who normally shows up. He says he's going to try and show up for the last two or maybe 1 hour. And we have Lupinit and Skip Collapsitarian here. So I'm going to do some housekeeping and then we can dive into this subject. Skip has done a lot of research for this particular part of it, so I'm looking forward to see what he has to bring to bear here. I just got done with my fucking 2-hour workout, so I'm feeling pretty good. It should be a relatively good show. This is brought to you by Brave, the ad-resistant, tracker-resistant browsing experience. It's also brought to you by the Cash app, a Federal Reserve note and Bitcoin wallet that comes with a Visa card that you can engrave however you want. At least in the bottom right corner there. There's also the Liberty Mugs affiliate link down there. So if you want to get a mug to piss off your coworkers with, feel free to consume fluids from a Liberty mug. These things are pretty guaranteed to get at least some conversation going, and they have funny and serious ones, plenty of other ones. They got one where if you're blocked by Liberty Hangout, you can get the Libertarian Purity Award printed on your mug. So feel free to pick any of those up. They have plenty to offer there. So it would be my pleasure to introduce Lupinit and Collapsitarian. Why don't you all tell people where they can find you, what you do, and who you are?
Yes, this is Skip, Collapsitarian. You can find me at The Free Rifleman on Twitter, and you can also find me at Collapsitarian1 on Twitter.
I am Lupinate. You can find me on Minds and Discord Lupinate, and on pretty much almost every single weekday now with Jeremiah on Bad Morning News.
Yeah, sorry, I fucking had to unmute my mic. Yeah, and I guess I'll also plug that. If you want to catch morning news that will piss you off instead of make you happy enough to be a good cog in the machine, feel free to check out Bad Morning News. We do that every Monday to Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. It's that way because effectively we don't pre-record, so it's not like Good Morning America where it's happening for everyone at the same time. I mean, maybe we'll take a poll or something. We'll find out who wants what. But effectively, yeah, we do that. And this particular subject today ties in nicely with that, because I talk regularly about the Bilderberg Group, about, essentially what amounts to Illuminati, the Freemasons, blah blah. But I also discuss globalism and the tyranny that's seeming to encroach more and more upon individual liberty every day, and broaden itself across the world, turning the entire place into a tax farm where eventually, if we keep on being irresponsible like we are, we're all going to die. So this is a relatively good subject to discuss with these two, because Skip's on a similar page with me, and Lupinit thinks I'm a pessimist about this, which, yes, I am. Unnecessarily, maybe. I don't know. But we'll find that out today. Skip, why don't you start? Because you've been researching this all week to get a better grasp on it. So why don't you give us a general overview of what you're going to present today?
Sure. Okay, so to start with, there are several different veins of thought that you could approach today's topic. Okay, and I just want to make this practical for everyone, because if you're not a natural-born skeptic, then you're pretty much a sucker. And so there's several different ways that you can look at this. One is kind of the most recent vein of thought, which is the deep state and the conspiracy of the deep state, and how basically the world is run, or the U.S. is run, and quite frankly, the U.S. by default kind of does run the world for the dollar hegemony, right? For the petrodollar. And I would say that if you consider just the deep state conspiracy, okay, I would say that there's more than enough information out there to demonstrate that it is on its own course. It cannot be deterred by voting. It cannot be deterred by, I mean, quite frankly, I don't even know that you know, a Bitcoin, you know, moving to cryptocurrency can quite frankly can derail the path that the deep state has in place. And I would say that if you spent maybe a day or two or three just looking into the deep state, you can kind of see where a lot of conspiracies go back further than the word deep state. A lot of them probably all the way back to Adam Weishaupt. So this is about the birth of the nation, roughly. It was about the same time frame. It would be difficult historically to trace it back much further than that, but the writings from Adam Weishaupt, and I'll make sure that I post a link in the thread that we've got going here for YouTube on Twitter, so that if you're on Twitter, you can get that link. But you know, basically, what I've noticed is that if you look at the recent history, and then you say, okay, all right, I can see it. There's a couple people running the world, and they can't really be derailed. Then if you take it and you go back just a little bit further, you can see that this has been in place, you know, say about the Rockefeller time frame, so late 1800, early 1900 time frame. So how much more of a leap back to the 1700s for Weishaupt and the original Illuminati concept? How hard of a leap is that? I don't know. I don't think it's that hard. But then again, I was kind of brought up under the John Birch Society, you know, reading, gosh, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, and I'm pacing the floor because I do that when I walk and talk. But what I've noticed,
what did he write?
Yeah, so what I've noticed, and I'll make sure I get some links up there for some of this, because I have a whole pile of links that I've been kind of tossing back and forth around the course of the week. But by and large, it's okay to be skeptical. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In fact, it's probably a good trait, because otherwise you'll just fall for anything that you come across and everything's true, and next thing you know, you're a flat earther. And so what I would say is that take a look at it in earnest, and then maybe provide some comments back in some of the links that I've got going. If you're a follower of me on Twitter, you know, I'd certainly like to see you know, some of it maybe troubleshooted. You know, maybe throw some counter arguments to it, because I'd be interested to see them.
Very cool. And what do you got, Lupin? It any ideas on this as a general overview before we dive into the meat of this?
Well, as an overview, the NWO, you can trace it back to wherever you want to, really. It's one of those sorts of conspiracies that it always comes out, if that makes sense. It's always there, rearing its ugly head. Somebody is pulling all of the strings to make it work for them. It's compelling. It's probable. I'm not saying that there isn't a plan for a group of people to do that. But 1, 2 people, no. Multiple families, maybe. But again, the network that you're talking about would have to have so many cogs working together side by side, all knowing that they have only one real thing protecting all of them. And that's if one of them goes down, they're all going down, because it'll be mutually assured destruction. Now, that kind of existence isn't one that, shall we say, breeds longevity, unless you can really profit off it. So I'm in two minds on the matter. I know that there's some very powerful families that have lived for hundreds of years, and I know that there are a lot of connections between them and the state. But then again, I just think if you can get rid of the state, their abilities would go away altogether. And I'm not entirely certain that everything is going their way either right now.
Well, we will certainly have some contentions there. I got two messages. I got one in chat coming from Finian saying that he'll be here shortly, so we might be able to see him shortly. And we also have Conan sending me messages on Twitter letting me know that there's every likelihood he'll be showing up in about 10 minutes, like 2 minutes ago, so probably 8 minutes. So those people should be able to join us relatively soon. So my general idea is I've watched essentially the same group of royal people and bankers, which are in some ways similar in nature, rule the entire world by piecemeal, with very, very few exceptions, for, essentially centuries, if not millennia. There's even arguments to be made that existing royal bloodlines trace all the way back to the ancient days, like the days of Rome and Greece, and that they've never actually really changed hands in terms of power in any dramatic sense. And I think that that would be where Skip and I are of a similar mind, especially since he's been really digging into this subject all week. And he has quite a lot of people invested in this that he's going to bring up. He posted a list on Twitter if anyone's interested. So let's just get into a few of the people that Skip's going to bring up. So why don't you start with one that really seems emblematic of the whole deal? Like,
Okay, sure. Somebody asked me this morning, just a few minutes before the podcast began, about George Soros, right? And it's kind of ironic that everybody gravitates towards Soros because, quite frankly, he is doing quite a bit of damage, around the globe. And somebody like that's that much of a billionaire certainly has to have a good amount of clout. And where does he fit in? And that was a good question. Somebody asked, where does Soros fit in with the 13 families? Because the 13 bloodlines, like you were talking about, do trace back quite a ways. And some of them are modern names that we recognize. For instance, the Kennedys, right? Kennedys, okay, yeah, I can buy that. There's been quite a few Kennedys in American politics. So, yeah, that one's legit, right? I'm just talking a little sarcastically, but, you throw a couple others in there, and some of them are strange. We don't recognize the name. And as soon as we don't recognize the name, we think, oh, well, this one's got to be bullshit. But what I found, I'm going to go to my link here real quick. So let's see. Take me a second here to get to it. All right, so the Astors. All right, John Astor. He was one of the original multi-millionaires, probably before billionaire was a thing. Astor family, Bundy family. And I don't think they're talking about Ted Bundy or what's the show? The Bundys. I don't think they're talking about him. Collins, DuPont. DuPont's a pretty recognized name. They pretty much run the chemical side of things here in the U.S. Freeman's. I mentioned the Kennedys. Lee is a very common name in China. Onassis. Some people might recognize Jackie Onassis, who married a Kennedy. The Rockefellers, they usually take a lot of the credit for what's being done. Rothschilds, as you know, one of the Rothschilds passed away a few years back, and I celebrated that one heartily. Russells, Van Dunes, and Moravian. And that one is very interesting because the Moravian bloodline is where Adolf Hitler came from, and it's also where George Soros came from. So that maybe that'll just highlight a little bit to help put some of this in frame of reference.
Very cool. So, looping it, do any of those names ring a bell?
There are quite a few on that list that do. Obviously, I mean, see, this is part of the problem I've got. I don't see, or I don't know of, I should say, a connection between all of those families. There may be interconnected ties from several hundred years ago, but speaking from a modern perspective, most people would not consider that bloodline decisions made 200 years ago having a valid impact on what's happening today now. So if we're looking at what's happening today now, we have to look at transactions. We have to look at what is going on between said families. Now, when it comes to Soros, Rothschild, Rockefellers, or even there's a few that you missed because they aren't well known. I mean, you mentioned the Lees, but you didn't mention the House of Saud or any of the other princes that have huge values of wealth and do influence quite a lot of activity in America and around the world because they can invest quite a lot of money into big companies and then help guide them into a given decision. It's that kind of thing. You have to link it all with where the money is. Cui bono. This is how it works. That's the only way you can link all this stuff together in the long run, because blood only runs so thick. It doesn't hold people together from that far apart, even though some people, it can. I don't think it would for most people who are truly powerful. They'll respect their immediate descendants, and they're probably a few up the line progeny, but I wouldn't expect them to respect a decision made 200, 300, 400 years ago as being something they need to keep doing now. That would be very backward. If that is this making sense? It just
Sure,
the logic of it to me is a bit flat. I'm not saying that the people aren't involved. A lot of them are. I would be quite happy to admit Soros and Rothschilds are two that I think are quite heavily involved in trying to manipulate human opinion on things. I don't think they've done a very good job of it, because none of the stuff they're trying to do seems to work.
Yeah, I've heard that argument, and I'm not opposed to what it is that you say, because quite frankly, what is it that these 13 families take, for instance? What is it that they do that impact everyone's everyday life? And part of that is difficult to prove, just simply because a lot of their meetings are done in secret, but some of them are televised. We've all seen the Alex Jones claims that we've seen the Alex Jones they're turning the frogs gay rant, and things like that. We've seen that, and of course some of that is theater.
A lot of that is theater.
Yeah. But I will tell you that he has actually gotten after it several times, as far as these meetings that they go to. And if you remember last week, the quote that I had from the So I Married an Axe Murderer, that was a comedic shot at people who basically follow some of these families and what it is that they do. There is an interesting there's an interesting chart out there that basically talks about the overall conspiracy, and it looks like it's handwritten. And it starts out at the top. It says Order of the Illuminati, and then it ties all these people together. I think what you're looking for is, you're not saying, hey, these people aren't involved. You're saying, I want to know what these ties are. And some of it is not well put together pieces of the puzzle. Okay,
I would say, for me, Skip, I would
Yeah.
say that my concern is that ties of blood, ties of family, or ties of name are not sufficient for me. There are probably a lot of Lees. There are probably a lot. I know for a fact that there are probably more than one Rockefeller out there. There's more than one Strock family, for example. Just to, even though there's only 400 people like in the country that had that
Sure.
name, they're not
Sure.
all direct relations of each other. They
Exactly.
There are
No,
ways
exactly.
it can be interlinked. And my concern is when people say, I've linked all these people, I've created this huge chart. Okay, great, but are you certain that those people are actually related? It's not just some bloke at the pub told me.
Right, sure. So that's a good argument, because some of my favorite writers in the libertarian world, there's been some excellent Freemans, and last name Freeman, but yet they're not involved in all of this. I mean, how could they be? How could they be involved in this and yet, basically promote individual liberty and, basically speak out against the state, when these organizations, as Jeremiah mentioned earlier, actually use the power of the state to control us. They use the power of banking to control us. And quite frankly, they turn us into tax cows on a feedlot. And so how is that possible? And, the only thing I can say is that, there are families, right? You look at a multi-generational billionaire family. Let's just, I'm not even going to name one, but just picture one in your mind. And then go down through that family and say, okay, why is it that only one of the successors of that billionaire actually took over the billionaire fortune, and the rest of them ended up living some bizarre life sitting in the middle of Crete, in the island of Crete or something? And the answer is that they pick their successors within their family. But remember, they use the bloodline, okay, to further their agenda. And so I guess...
One sec. I would agree with you back up to about 1800. That was definitely how it worked. It would be picked. It would usually be based on rank of birth. It would be a number of factors that determine it. Nowadays, there are probably more than one person being groomed for that position. And I would say that there's probably more redundancy now in those circles. It's a bit oversimplistic to say it's going to be one man and one man only, because then you're a bit fucked if that guy gets hit by a bus. And shit like that will happen.
Sure. So, okay, so that's a bad example, just saying that it's one person that's picked. But what I will tell you is that they certainly go through their process to vet out of that family those who are not going to be involved in this multi-generational influence on the globe. And I mean, let's face it. Let's take Walmart, for example, right? You've got the heirs of the Walmart generation, that started Walmart, right? And his name is slipping me, so let me look it up real quick. Take me a second here. But what I will tell you is that they have had a huge influence in the see here.
Well, also, so while you look that up,
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. This takes unexpected turns, and I don't always have the names right on my. There we go. Walton family. Yeah.
Well, and that's what I like, because like I sort of thought of this as like people shooting the shit at like a bar or whatever. Like it's sort of like that. It's sort of like that metal show for anarchists.
Yeah.
So on that level, it's also worthwhile to mention something that was posted in the chat already, which is that, you know, and this is a point I hammer in regularly. It's not necessarily even controlling the wealth that these people would use to puppeteer the planet. It's controlling the debt, because then they have an unlimited, ever-increasing supply of numbers that hang like a leash or a noose, depending on the way you think about it, around the necks of the common man. And so, yeah, I mean, realistically, there's not going to be one person at the head of everything. It's not like there's still the king. But there are enough people with enough shared interests and enough ways that they agree that essentially they formed their own coalition against the people, which is why, I don't know if anybody's seen my Twitter changes lately, but I have a new profile banner, and that banner indicates my my stance as an anarcho-coalitionist. We need to form a bigger coalition than they have. That's my point. But essentially, they formed this coalition, and they formed this coalition so that they can continue to make as much, you know, profit as they do, as regularly as they do, without interference. And that's why they do what they do. What were you going to say, Skip? And also, actually, before you say that, real quick, we got Conan, son of Conan, on this chat. So why don't you introduce yourself, let people know where they can find you and what you do, and any thoughts on what's been said so far if you've been listening.
Yeah, I'm Conan, son of Conan. You can find me at Opelika Creek on Twitter. And yeah, I basically just spill guts and bang sluts and kill the state. Yeah, that's what we're saying. I did just catch just the last small portion of that. You were making references to coalitions. Were you referring to the Bilderbergers group?
Right. Well, and
Yeah,
not to like the Bilderberg group is just one example of coalitions. Then there are like the more publicly known coalitions like NATO and the G whatever it is that year. You know, so there are plenty of coalitions that exist, but there are also a lot of secret ones that aren't even talked about, like with front organizations like Skull and Bones and the Freemasons and shit. So there are plenty of examples here.
Yeah, that's the order. Yeah. The chapter 322, Skull and Bones, out of Yale, they began in 1833.
And of course, you know, the 33rd degree Masons.
Yeah.
So, well, so you were going to say something before I introduced Conan. So why don't you say what you were going to say? Because I think it was in direct response to looping it here.
Sure. Yeah. So what I was just going to mention was, it's interesting, you know, the Walton family influence on politics. You know, they almost had Hillary Clinton as the next president, and you know, of course, the connection between the Waltons, Walmart, the Clintons being out of Arkansas, you know, the Walton family, you know, basically headquartered out of Arkansas, the Walton Family Foundation. So let's see, in 1988, they were at 2 billion. 2013, currently they're at 140 billion. That's a lot of money to influence things. And again, that's not me saying, oh, they shouldn't have that kind of money.
Denying that.
Yeah, that's a lot of money to influence things. But the way things, were divided up in that family is that they selected the heirs in that family that were going to be the most successful at carrying on that effort. Now, what I will tell you is that, you know, if there's 2 or 3, you know, sons and a daughter, they might pick one of those sons and one of those daughters based on what they expect for their progeny to continue. And I'll give you an example. Who was the heir that was killed in England in and you should be well versed in this.
Which
there
one?
was a lot of conspiracy around her death. Apparently,
Diana.
she was Diana. That was
She isn't an heir.
Right,
Let's clarify
right.
something.
No.
Diana is not
Hold on.
was in no way, shape, or form an heir.
I got that, but what I'm
She
saying
could never
is,
have inherited the throne.
Got it. What I'm saying though is that these families have the ability to steer things based on that. That they used her popularity to gain a foothold.
Again, Skip, I'm sorry. I think you're going down a dead end rabbit hole with that one. Because Diana has a conspiracy of her dying. Yeah, that maybe you might be able to run with on this. But to use her within that framework, it's a bit more dicey. Because it's a much more complicated story than most people understand. Because you've got basically a royal involved in.
We lost you
all of
after
this.
basically.
Okay, sorry.
We also just lost you after
Prince fell in
saying,
love with.
maybe like I don't know. You've got internet connection problems right now, but
There we go. Let me try that.
Okay, that might be better. All right.
Yeah,
So
I've
what were you
just
saying?
turned off my Wi-Fi. Basically, Diana wasn't really. Her death is more of the conspiracy that everybody pays attention to than the life. And the life of Diana is not going. It wasn't somebody being groomed. It was somebody who would give heirs, and that's about it. So there's no real pathway for Diana to take reins of anything. You'd have to groom usually the male heirs, and if there are no male heirs, then the female heirs. So it's that kind of process, and this is part of the problem I've got with the 13 families. I'd accept fewer rather than 13 working consistently over centuries. It's that combination of time and things like that.
This is bloodlines, not family. Okay. Now, the reason why that's important is because they will, like you said, just like the kings and the queens, they continue very much the same way. And so family, my association of family is last name, and that's it. But that's not how they operate. They don't operate the same way that we in today's world, we think of family, we think of maybe last name, maybe a hyphenated last name, but for the most part, just that last name. But what I'm saying is these bloodlines, they can trace all of these pertinent people back into these 13 bloodlines consistently. And I wish I could go into the level of detail that I think you're asking for. But honestly, a week is not enough time to be able to give you the detail that you are asking for right now.
That's fair enough, but I've got a more reasonable scientific explanation why 13 bloodlines would be tied to very affluent families. There are a limited number of people involved in certain periods of history with women. Take, for example, Genghis Khan, okay? Most of Asia is descended from Genghis Khan. That's not because of anything except for the fact that he shagged a lot of women and had a lot of kids. That's basically it. Same thing for Charlemagne. Most of the world in Europe can trace themselves back to Charlemagne if they want to.
But we're not talking about people who are tangentially related. We're talking about people who are related by 1 or 2 degrees of separation in very specific ways. Like we're talking about people who came from, who were either the children or the children's children of the people in power, and those people got there in power very specifically because they knew people immediately, and they had enough wealth to transfer down and enough willingness to do whatever was necessary to keep it, that effectively they joined the secret societies and became part of the problem in a very specific way. That's what we're talking about. That's what Skip's talking about. And I'd like to hear more of what Skip has to say on this. Try to let him finish his sentences, by the way, because I noticed that happened a couple times. But like effectively, we're not talking about somebody, because I'm tangentially related to royalty. I'm related, I think, like some semi-directly to Warren G. Harding, and every president is related to this single English lord. I can't remember his name, but you know, to say that, you know, me, who's poor and was never offered an opportunity to be part of the elite Illuminati, whatever, is similar in any way to the people who were raised with that sort of money and raised with the idea that using that sort of money to fuck with the entire planet are on the same level or on a similar level even, seems like a distraction from the main point here.
That's not what I'm trying to say, though, mate. What I'm trying to say is, if you're talking bloodlines, that's even less of a connection than families. Because
no.
blood, yes, it is.
Because
I don't see why it isn't.
We're talking the thickness of the blood. We're talking about where it flows from one person directly to the next and directly to the next. We're not talking about one person flowing directly to the next and then tangentially getting down to some dude who runs a subway. We're talking about the idea of people directly transferring money down to their son and power down to their daughter and things like that. That's what we're discussing. And those bloodlines are very, very thick, and they run for a very long time back in history.
That is how you pass on wealth, by the way. That is the only way. Inheritance is the only way that you pass on wealth. And quite frankly, you know, their goal is not just to gain more wealth, but to ensure that their progeny continues having the power that they have. And the irony is that these families are behind, you know, the socialist and the communist movements across the globe because they use it as a tool, not because they practice it. And I'll give you a perfect example, because, you know, if you go down the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, one of the efforts is to basically stop the movement of that wealth from one generation to the other. Well, let's not pick bones about 13 bloodlines and how these families or these bloodlines, you know, rule the world. But let's just look at it from a practical experiment and say, if I want to do the best for my family, right, my son, my daughter, you know, and that kind of thing, then I plan for them. But if I actually want to have a transfer of wealth, say I'm successful and I want to have a transfer of wealth, I'm not going to spend every dollar before I die. I'm going to make sure that moves along with the opportunities that I make for my children to that next generation. The most successful wealth transfers are multi-generational, and I don't think anybody's disputing that. But the most successful wealth transfers are multi-generational, meaning that I'm not planning for my children's future, I'm planning for my grandchildren's future. And all they're doing is putting that into practice. But they're
Can I get a clarification?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. There's something that's confusing me a little bit about that chain. Is it that the best transfers are always multi-generational, or that the only way to ensure a family continues to have influence and power is through a multi-generational transfer of said power?
I would say that it's the most effective way.
Okay, continue your point, because I do actually have a counter to that, but I want to hear the rest of the point.
Sure. So some of the institutions that have been set up over the several hundred years, you know, you conceded the Rothschilds, right? So the House of Rothschild, the Rhodes-Milner Round Table, which is at Oxford. So the order is at Yale, and the group is at Oxford, and that actually dates back to the 1200s. Very similar goals in mind, and that is where you get the Rhodes Scholars that come out of the group. The Bilderbergers, which is the Council of 500, that goes back to the mid 1900s. That's like 1959. So that's a little bit more recent than some of the older orders or organizations that are designed to basically influence and shape. You know, that's the whole idea, is to influence and shape the way the world is going to move. And you know, the United Nations was set up on the tail end of the death of the League of Nations, right? The League of Nations was a failure, and they went ahead and they set up the United Nations. That is a major tool in enabling a lot of this. And what I would tell you is if you want to have civil unrest in a place, make sure that you have the UN involved. You know, because they do exactly the opposite of what it is that they're prescribed to do. But so their influence is involved, and the way that they're involved is that, you know, they've got the Atlantic Council, and they've got the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union that dated back to 1918, that were you know, quite involved in the United Nations. Then you've got the Trilateral Commission connected to the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. That there's a link between the Council of Foreign Relations to the UN by way of the IMF. That's the International Monetary Fund that I think we touched on that maybe two weekends ago. I can't remember, but
I think it was last
definitely
weekend.
We definitely talked about it last weekend, and IMF is fucking awful, and it also supplies a huge amount of essentially country-controlling, quote, aid to people who don't need it and who are harmed by it. So it's very, very shit.
Sure.
I mean, you're not going to get me denying that those institutions exist and that their intention is to, okay, how best can I put this? Manipulate society for its interests rather than societies themselves. Doing it for the benefit of society under that guise, but actually, usually it's just for some specific set of individuals' benefits, or just a way to navigate what is next on the list of things that's going to happen. Because to be quite frank, some of the cards I think are on the wall, or some of the writings on the wall, shall we say, for a lot of what's going on. Especially right now. Yeah,
sure. So let's see. You know, I'm switching back and forth between several tabs on my computer. So I did talk about the CFR. They actually have a sort of like a sister organization, just like the Yale has Oxford. The Council on Foreign Relations has a sister to it, and that's the Royal Institute for International Affairs. Now, that was established in 1919. What I don't have is an up-to-date picture of what it is that they're doing right now. I didn't get that far into it, but I will tell you that all of these organizations, it's interesting that all of these organizations have representation at the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve stockholders, which still to this day is not a published list. We can, you can get notes from meeting minutes and things like that from their meetings, and of course, maybe it has everything that was discussed, and maybe it doesn't. But the linkages between these organizations and the families that I talked about earlier, the bloodlines, is very interesting. And I think that if you take a week and delve into it, it's quite damning, I think, because you start to look at it and you say, yeah, this looks an awful lot like central planning to me. And that's pretty much what it is that they do. The Federal Reserve I think we've realized is over leveraged, and I know Finian gets into that quite a bit about the over leveraged.
Yeah, and he should be able to come on relatively soon too,
which is great. So I'll hold off on that part because I know that he likes to get into that. Yeah, he likes to get into that and the banks, and I think that he probably would do it better justice than I would from that regard.
I mean, I can give a quick sum up before he gets here, because you're talking 20, what was it? Over 20 trillion in debt, over 100 trillion in liabilities, all of it, and then you have to factor in all the subsidies, everything else that the economy runs on. It's basically everything is a pile of cards, and they're trying to make a house out of it, and there is no bottom rung. That's about the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and I would say that house of cards is certainly getting taller. You know, the more over leveraged we become, the higher that house of cards goes, which of course guarantees, you know, the failure. And you know, whether that's by design is interesting, because I certainly it's hard to believe that anyone, let alone you know, the people who run the world, as opposed to the people that we think that we select to run the world, for the voting few that might be listening. It's kind of interesting to think that people would actually collapse it, but that kind of comes into where the Georgia Guidestones, where that really raised my eyebrows when I read what's on the Georgia Guidestones. Jeremiah, I know that you've spent a lot more time researching the Georgia Guidestones, but you know, it is a little eerie that the closer we get to the collapse of that house of cards, and quite frankly, could be a reset of society in general. It's interesting how things like that pop up.
And you know, talking the Georgia Guidestones, they make it sound fucking nice. They make it sound like perpetual harmony with nature, and that's the way they phrase. Essentially, we're going to cut every human down that isn't among the direct bloodlines of the elites, because that's 500 million people. We have close to 8 billion people on the fucking planet now, and they want to cut us down to like 0.5 of one of those billions. They want to do that to the entire planet. And who are they going to hit? Well, it's sort of like that body count song, isn't it? You know, when it comes to the poor, no lives matter. So they get us to be the proles creating the infrastructure for what they do. And we say, thank you, master. May I have another? Because essentially the average person is so strapped for cash that they need any work they can get, even if it's building a giant bunker setup under whatever airport happens to be next after the Denver International Airport. So,
right.
I mean, realistically speaking, we got fundamentally evil people with fundamentally evil plans. And, you know, let me be very specific. They've got AU on a placard on what looks like a mine cart over the Denver International Airport. So they know they're hiding their wealth under there. They know they're hiding everything they need to reset civilization once this collapses. And they know it, so they have a big-ass thing of death with a gas mask, and then death being conquered with a multicultural blah blah coming out on the other side of this. So they know exactly what they're getting into, and they want it that way. So
yeah,
I'm going to get Finian on. He wanted a link. I guess I forgot to send him one. So once he gets on, he'll be able to describe more in detail what she said he was good at describing. But yeah, generally I would agree with that. I would say that they're headed toward a collapse to get their final perpetual harmony with nature that they're trying to like overhype. And that's why it's really funny when organizations like PBS, which are publicly funded institutions with occasional donations drives from the proles, doing videos on fucking overpopulation, having babies pictured in a nuclear bomb. Like, that's just cute and funny and kind of adorable and something shareable on the internet. You know, not like it's part of their sinister plan, and not like it's part of how they view us, the explosion, not them, who have made it so obvious that they're just using us as cattle with like product codes attached to the outside of our plastic wrap.
And you know what? That's a perfect segue for just mentioning Stefan Molyneux's one YouTube video that I have really enjoyed, and I use it often. And I don't agree with everything that Stefan says, but you don't have to. One of the things that I really find interesting is the one video that he does titled "The Nature of Your Enslavement." It's very well done, and it really just brings home the whole entirety of basically how they built a world plantation. It's a world plantation now, and literally how it, people fight to the realization of that, and they're willing to sell themselves to the point where, you know, they don't want to admit it. This can't possibly be true, you know. And of course, social engineering is basically, you know, taking the Hollywood elite and the media, you know, the music media, the media, the music industry, and they take this and they do things like throw out the Illuminati symbol and things like that, that quite frankly, in my opinion, is really designed to mock the very organization as a way to get people to say, oh, see, that there's no way that stuff exists. Look at they're making, you got kids paying $25-$35 for shirts that say Illuminati on it with the little triangle and the eye. And I mean, how could it possibly be this organization that actually is enslaving us all? You know, how would they let this happen? And it's interesting how it's almost duplicitous in the fact that, yes, we are enslaved, and we are enslaved by way of debt. But at the same time, we've got this capitalism that basically promotes the continued social engineering of future generations. Finian, it's good to see you. Let's get you on.
Hey guys, sorry for being late.
Oh, you're fine. So who are you? What do you do? Introduce yourself, because there might be new people here.
Sure, right. You can mainly find me on Steemit these days, same name that's on here. Also on Twitter is my business account. It's Liberty Pro PI, and I have a residential security and private investigation business in Virginia. And of course, I'm also a registered PI, but my main passion in life is residential security. So that's the main thing I'm studying and working towards doing more of in the future.
Very cool. So on that level, what do you think of what's been said so far? I think Skip also wanted you specifically to discuss the over-leveraging of the Fed and many other institutions similar to that one.
Well, who owns the Fed? Does anybody know what banks are behind it and who actually runs them?
We were touching on some of that. The different organizations that actually have people put into the Fed as stockholders in the Fed, but yet that list of names is generally not a published list. But I would like to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Quick question: stock or stakeholder?
The people making the money off the interest.
Yeah, sorry, stockholder. Wrong word.
Yeah, nobody knows for sure. Basically, it's a big secret. The reason why I asked that is because when I was listening to you guys on the way home, I was telling my wife, I was like, man, this rabbit hole is way deeper than this. Like, I know you guys were talking about like the Rockefellers and more modern day names of very wealthy people, but this kind of stuff goes back like, you know, at least a couple thousand years, of course, and the rabbit hole's so deep. Like, it's not just the Fed. There's wealthy families, there's royal blood, there's all these different, sometimes actually competing families and organizations. So it's not like I know Lupinate's talked about this. Like, there is no one grand conspiracy and one big Illuminati group that runs everything. It's basically impossible. It's it's a bunch of different groups vying for the most power that they can get. And they do have that power. I mean, like, there's not much you can do about them, but like Soros, for example, he pays protesters to go out and cause havoc so he can make money in the stock market. Like, the guy's just in it for the money. I mean, you
Yeah.
guys were talking earlier, like, he's not actually being that effective in changing any actual direction in government, and I don't even think that's his goal. I think he seems like a, like, mid-level player, but to me, from what I've researched on this kind of stuff, he's a way, way low-level one, and he's just in it to make as much money as he can. But yeah, we have an economic issue. I was talking with a very high up, I guess you'd consider him a consultant basically in the government on Friday. And he was telling me like all these different things that the government's worried about that might or might not happen. And I tell people this stuff all the time too. Like, we can't prepare or do anything about most of them. You can change where you live and you can stockpile more food and not depend on cash. But some of the things that might happen, you have no control over. So basically, we shouldn't be losing sleep over it. And some of these global elites, they know all the same stuff, basically, that higher up people in our government do. And they're preparing in the same way. They're not paranoid. They're not hiding in bunkers or anything, but they're making sure that if anything bad happens, them and their family are the ones that survive. And I've said it 100 times on these past hangouts. Like, there's no reason everybody listening and in this call could not do the same thing. And you're capable of doing pretty much the same thing they are. You just have to do it in advance.
There's
So if
some
fucking
company
Google
in.
kicked me off the call again,
You
apologies.
need to
for
sort
that
your
to all the
mic.
listeners.
Need to sort your mic.
Okay.
I wanted to quickly say, in relation to that, I saw a program of some guy basically in California in the desert with trying to flip properties for about 100 grand that were basically just giant bunkers, outfitted for at least 1 year, full self-sustaining, with no issues whatsoever.
Gotcha.
You can live with basically can house up to 24 people per bunker. And this was a field of military, basically a military base that had been abandoned, and just fields upon fields of locations to build on.
Yeah.
Well, that's another thing that private small party, the little people like us, I include that myself, of course, in there, the small time players should be paying attention to, because governments and wealthy people are preparing for something pretty dramatic, like call it a solar flare or, an EMP that shuts down the electrical grid. It doesn't matter what it is, but yeah, they're making private bunkers. The government's making government bunkers. And, why are they doing that unless they plan on using them? That's always been my question.
Yeah, because they
My
come at a
theory on-
great cost. They really do. The amount of expense in engineering underground, believe it or not, is more expensive. I have a source of a person who is they're a subterranean engineer, and their job is basically to engineer buildings designed to be self-sustaining underground. And this person has, kind of shown me some plans and said, hey, yeah, can't tell you where this is, but this is really interesting. And I've seen some plans and stuff like that. And this person has, so it's a different type of architecture that you do when you build these types of things. Some are small, and they're designed specifically for different organizations, or sometimes they're family owned. And then other times they're government owned or put there for purposes of government. But some of the old ones that have been around a long time, they've either refurbished them, and I think that recently, I think it was under the West Wing, there was one that was refurbished. But then there are times that they're actually supposed to be destroyed. Like, for instance, the ones along the I-10 and I-19 corridor in southern Arizona that used to be the Titan II missile silos. Now, those have all been destroyed with the exception of one, and that has actually been turned into a museum. I took my wife and children in there to go take a look at it. You can actually go down. They take you down underneath, and you can go through all the different corridors, and you can look down the silo. And what they did was they took the silo door, and they made half of it glass so that it could be seen from space by any other, spy agencies for other countries, to ensure that, yes, that's no longer an active silo, but all the others were imploded. And myself and a few friends actually went and explored one. We contacted a landowner that they had imploded the silo, and they had destroyed the entrance into the command bunker. And now the command bunker is interesting because it sits on these giant springs, so that if the shock of the ICBMs were to hit anywhere near it, that you'd have that shock, that incredible earthquake type shock. And so it was designed to basically protect the hardened electronics that were inside. So they had these giant shock absorbers that would basically shake, so that of course, I'm certain it would hurt when it hit, but the idea was to try to protect the inside as far as the circuitry and things like that. But they had the place where the suits hang when you go into the museum. They have where the suits, the decontamination suits, and when they've got to go around and check the chemical mixtures for the Titan II missiles. Now, what they did during the SALT, I think it's the SALT II treaty under Reagan, was those actual missiles were taken out. They were removed. They were later reused to put satellites in space. But what they did was they imploded the actual silos so that it wouldn't have the ability to be used again. That was expensive. Not just the destruction, but the verification, because part of that SALT treaty was that we were going to destroy a certain number, Russia was going to destroy a certain number, and then we were going to basically show verification to each other that they were destroyed. That's very expensive. But again, remember, it's all done with other people's money. And no one can spend other people's money like the government. But anyway, so yeah, some of those, instead of being destroyed, have been converted. And I don't know exactly where all of them are, but they're spread across the country. And what they do is there's been some developers that have gone in and bought them. And you can find different types of realtors that can find those types of sites. And I'll give out a blog, survival blog with Jim Rawls. There's every now and then there's an advertiser on his blog website that has people who specialize in finding those types of either subterranean bunkers or different things like that, or homes that already have a bunker built into it. And they have realtors that specialize in that. And every now and then they have an advertisement for the silos. And they go in and they completely refit these silos to basically house, multiple families all the way down. They had a UAV that could be launched from their roof that would basically go out and see what's going on around, what's going on, depending on what reason it is that they had to go inside. They have aquaponics systems that are designed to, basically produce vegetables and fish. And that way they would have a source of food that was inside. And so basically there's like a layout that shows how these bunkers, these silos, were actually turned into family living. I'm certain that they're probably pretty expensive. I think I remember seeing that it was about $1 million a floor if you wanted to purchase a floor. And so that was kind of a big thing prior to 2012. But I don't know if maybe the bubble burst on that market, or if the bubble has continued just in that market alone. But it is very interesting.
Wasn't 2012 the Aztec calendar or whatever?
Mayan.
Yeah, that one. Whatever.
This is the problem.
I
This is the
laughed my
problem.
ass off so hard when like 3 people I knew were proven wrong on that.
You see, the thing about all of these bunkers is there will be swings and roundabouts when it comes to their popularity. Right now, everybody's freaking out over the stuff they're being told to freak out about regarding Trump and how he's going to somehow start World War III by declaring world peace. Don't quite know how that's going to work, but hey, we'll tackle that in a minute. But yeah, it's that kind of principle of when people go that little bit over the edge, they immediately see everything is about to be destroyed, therefore we need a bunker. And although I'm not saying if you have the money, it's a good idea to have a bunker, I am saying that is probably a good idea if you have the money, but I wouldn't recommend it to everybody and sundry when it could all just be hot air. And probably is.
Well, yeah, like I always say, a nuclear exchange is the worst case scenario. But for me, though, the best case scenario is a global collapse that's going to make the Great Depression look like child's play. And I just shared a link in the private group chat because I know I can't do it on the Hangout one, but that's a video from today. And he's a previous banker, he's an expert in the field basically, and what he's saying is there's no way around this coming economic collapse. It's going to happen. They just don't know exactly when. They don't know how many tricks they're going to play to avoid it. But when it happens, the Great Depression, like the population of the United States was something like 70 million or something, and 5 million people died. So the smart and the wealthy people are paying attention to that kind of thing. They know that the next collapse is going to be global, and it's going to be way worse, and it's going to take longer to recover from. So that gets back to this whole shelter thing. It's like, okay, well, if you know there's going to be that level of unrest and that many problems, then having a shelter is not a bad idea, even if you don't think something like a nuclear war is going to happen.
You see, my argument is if if you know that there's a collapse coming, try and see the weak points now and short them. Take some money and bet against those companies. This market, every single stock market is just a giant casino. That's how you have to think about it.
Doug Casey is actually really good at that. Doug Casey has some phenomenal videos, and I think he was on Daily Reckoning. They do some write-ups on dailyreckoning.com. I think Whiskey and Gunpowder was another website that used to do a lot of stories from Doug Casey, where they would basically talk about emerging markets, but then also about shorting certain markets. But yeah, Doug Casey, unfortunately, he was calling for an economic reset back in the 80s on the Phil Donahue show. And if you haven't seen that video, it's available on YouTube. Just look up on there, Doug Casey on Phil Donahue, and you can find him. It's pretty easy. But it's actually an interesting video. If you listen to him back in the 1980s, a lot of the things that he talked about are things that have either kind of happened or are still a current threat that just haven't occurred. But it's fascinating. And you know what I think is really interesting is to look at the interaction between Phil Donahue, which I would consider to be, probably as I don't hate to say the word socialist, but at the time, he was very, very against individual liberties. He was very pro-collectivist.
You could call him an interventionist.
Yeah, certainly interventionist. Yeah, and
I mean, in terms of markets, like if you're an interventionist, you want to intervene in the markets. You're basically a supply side, not demand side.
Right. Yeah. Sure. And so Doug Casey is one of those that I would say if you're looking to, again, this is for other people listening in, if they're looking to short markets or find avenues where there are good opportunities. If you subscribe to some of the things that Doug Casey does, there is some good points that he makes. And then another one, and oh, by the way, he is one of those rich people that has like multiple places to go if he needed to. And then another
Good man.
one, yeah, and another one that's really interesting is oh, I just lost. Mike Maloney. Mike Maloney does
Oh, yeah,
gold,
oh, dude.
silver. Yeah,
Yes,
he's
yeah.
great. He does one of the
his
best.
series,
Go ahead. Sorry.
his series, Hidden Secrets of Money, is fucking amazing. If you read my Twitter, the pinned tweet that I've had for 2 years now, you know, maybe it'll change sometime. I don't fucking know, but you know, it's been the pinned tweet for 2 years now, and it's essentially the distilled rage I got trying to explain his thing to people for like the past 2 years before I wrote that. And his series is fucking amazing. Also, of course, Peter Schiff is relatively good at discussing the same thing, and he was on Joe Rogan recently. He was on the Joe Rogan show for I think 3 hours, and so everybody should check that out too. If we're shilling videos on other people's channels, I would definitely say check out the Joe Rogan Peter Schiff interview. But go ahead.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, all of those are actually very good. Go ahead, Finian.
And Schiff is the whole purpose of his Euro Pacific Capital, his wealth fund, and he owns some of our family money, and he manages it basically. And his main objective is betting against the dollar. So he's in emerging markets, gold stocks, and betting against the U.S. dollar. That's like their primary objective. And you know, I gave them a small amount of my wealth on purpose because it's a solid bet. It might not. It might not pay tomorrow. It might not pay in 5 minutes or 5 years, but it's going to pay off because, again, there's like the video I linked, the Ergon von Greiser guy and people like Rob Kirby. They're telling you, all these experts are telling us, if anybody wants to listen to them, that this is coming. They're all shocked that it hasn't happened yet, but they know it has to happen. Like there's no way out from behind it. We already have crazy things like the Swiss National Bank buying our stock market. Again, I say our, but the United States stock market. You've got other central banks bailing out different other central banks. I mean, they're playing like all these different tricks, and maybe they'll come up with some new trick. I don't know, like to postpone it and make it last
I think
longer.
they are. This is the thing. I really do think everybody but America is coming up with a plan to deal with the dollar. Nobody wants to be reliant on that.
So
Europe
people
is
still
screwed.
see. Here's the thing: people still want to be reliant on the dollar so far, for the most part, but they're forming basically blockchain solutions to their societies, and a lot of these blockchain solutions are being developed by central banks so that they can still seem like alternatives while not actually being alternatives. And if any of these central banks are the ones developing these blockchain infrastructures, especially since plenty of them are hooked up to things like EID, which is fucking terrifying, if anybody knows what that means. Because essentially what that means, and like I'll go off on this tangent and I'll try to reel it back in, but the EID system, especially on a blockchain, especially affiliated with everything else, would essentially mean that they were tracking you everywhere, not giving you any privacy. And basically, it's a big bell hanging around the neck of tax cattle, meaning that if they don't have the EID, it's like the mark of the beast every religion talks about, being relative to like some sort of like terrible end time scenario. Because in the end times, the last gasping throes of the evil empire is going to be managing us all like very specific minute numbers and data. That's the reason quantum computing was so scary being brought up at Bilderberg, because these people are talking quantum computing, smart cities, societies of a scalable nature that basically monitor every fucking thing you do, and an EID system to not let you vote or participate in the economy or own property or etc. blah blah if you don't fucking have it. That is going to be the new solution, but it's not gonna, be a friendly solution to the dollar. It's going to be fucking worse.
Yeah, and along with that will come a higher, more powerful level of government too. That's the whole getting back to the New World Order thing. They want a global power, the Bank of International Settlements, whatever it's going to be, whatever they're going to call it when it happens. So, the Fed, quote unquote Fed as people know it, is going to fail or not work the way it was intended. And they'll be like, oh, look, that was horrible. We need something better than that. And it'll end up being the BIS. And the problem with the US dollar, and I get in arguments with people about this all the time, it's already dead. The US dollar it's worthless, and it's just the money is
It's
not
a zombie.
States yet.
It's okay. It's not dead. It's on life support, and it's being kept on life support so that people can keep pulling from its existing quote value. But it has pretty much none at this point in terms of any sort of value to anybody but the elites. It's dead entirely.
The dollar is a zombie currency. That is about the best way of putting it, because it is still moving, still doing things, still eating its way through your soul, but it's not really alive.
Well, what I would say is that, and the reason why this hasn't collapsed is because they're still able to milk out the little bits and pieces of people's savings. Because again, the idea is to take every little bit of all of the available stored wealth that is out there. They want to maximize as much of that as they possibly can before I think that we see the actual collapse. And it's interesting to see how they're able to do things like artificially suppress the price of gold, for instance, when right now gold should be ridiculously high. And
that's not that unusual. That's been something that's been going on for decades.
Oh, sure, but the way they do it is new, because because every time that somebody starts to investigate how it's being done, and the silver market is the same way, they find other ways to be able to short the market in a way that they are able to artificially suppress the prices. And I think that part of it is just to try to prevent a run on metals, because as soon as there's a run, the gig is up. Everybody knows that at that point there'll be a run on everything.
Skip, if there's a run on metals, guys, then it's going to run out very, 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 very quickly.
Yeah,
because there isn't enough physical in existence for the paper copies that exist out there. It's just
the silver physical to paper, last I knew, was like 1 to 270 or something ridiculous.
Gold is even higher.
Yeah. And
so
that's
my recommendation.
Suppressing the price, though. They're suppressing the price by GLD and SLV, the paper contracts without actual physical delivery.
Yeah,
and
the paper contract
for a very long time.
The paper contract is a key way of doing it. Another key way of doing it is a selling pattern that they use, and they've been doing this for, honestly, this one has been going on for decades. You buy through the night, and then sell in the morning, everything. So you'd have these would be multinational banks doing this. And this is the COMEX exchange scandal. Kind of broke last year. And when I say kind of, it got reported in a few financial papers, and then it just died, like overnight. City AM was reporting it for about a week, and then it just vanished off of every single paper that I read. And that worried me, because it meant that whatever was found is a lot worse probably than they're willing to admit, and all of the banks are involved. So when you have every single bank doing this, you can't just go, that's not right, because then everybody's money takes a tank. And that is something central banks actually have to think about when they are doing these investigations is, are we going to fuck everybody by fucking one man up? Yes, no.
Well, they're doing another game too, and they're making sure that they secure all of their wealth before the music stops.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things.
And that's the key thing.
Like, yeah, we're in the looting stage of the empire basically at this point, and it's a game to see how much wealth you can secure before everything falls apart.
Yeah,
and
we're playing musical chairs.
Yeah.
And we don't know how many chairs are actually still left.
Well, I was, again, the same guy I was talking to on Friday. It's not a coincidence that when a country like Germany requests to get its gold back from the U.S. Federal Reserve, they get told it's going to take 7 years. And then we have a lot of conflicts, military conflicts, where gold is either shipped or flown out after the fact. Then the gold is delivered 5 years early. And this is all on record. It's not like this is a conspiracy. Germany complained because when they got their gold back, it was not the gold that they gave the Fed. It had been recasted. And it goes back, this has been going on for years, the last 20 years, basically. All this gold's being exchanged. The French had some gold, apparently, of the Germans. The Germans asked it back, or asked for it back. And literally within a month of the Germans asking for it back, the French invaded Mali, which is like the number 2 gold producer in Africa. Like, this shit doesn't happen just by coincidence. All
of
the
course it
gold that
doesn't.
got shipped out of Iraq, all the gold that got taken out of Ukraine. So they're playing this
19
game, and people like us should be paying attention because countries like Russia and China are stockpiling tons of gold, and they're doing it because this game that we've seen and lived all of our lives, at the benefit of, at least the people in the West, it's coming to an end. And what's going to happen when it comes to an end is, guess what? Our standard of living is going to go way down. The United States of America will be a third world country if it even exists.
I agree.
Yeah, well, and not to mention the fact that if this sort of thing happens, it is going to spur chaos. Every one of those, like, mental midgets who claims that, like, anarchists should just move to Somalia, every one of those people is going to be, like, reaching for the closest weapon and killing somebody who doesn't deserve it. And if you think the children were of the concerns of the elites, you're gonna have a whole lot harder time protecting your children than if you had recognized that you needed to protect yourself and that really you needed to invest in your own defense, your own security. Because if you don't, if you're not, doing something like Skip, like making your home mag setups and your reloading setups and buying boxes of ammo, or Finian, like trying to figure out a trade that he can learn in the post-apocalypse, which is absolutely not being a distillery. Lupin it being like in Britain so that he can be a beacon of interest and telling people of this sort of thing. If you're not doing that, then you're going to be part of the reason that everything collapses around you.
Yeah, my main objective is to have as many of my friends, i.e. people that are interested in individual liberty, to survive it. That's my main objective. If I get 10, 100 people to survive what's coming, I will die with a big smile on my face.
And you know what, though, Finian? And I suspect that you're doing the same thing as I am, which is not only am I working on my core group of friends and trying to guide us toward being able to live sustainably after the collapse and have a level of security to where we kind of have, like, we have a specific area where we're like, okay, we need to establish security. And then outside of that, okay, we've got a person that's really good at this. And then we've got another person that's really good at that. And so we try to have a diversified level of skill sets because it's very difficult to do that, especially nowadays, because nowadays everything is moving towards specialization. Your job is to write Java code, or your job is to do something very, very specific, and specialization is for insects, and Heinlein said that. And so the idea
I was about to
is
say that.
Yeah. So the idea is to have as diverse a capability as possible. It's good to have people with medical training, medical backgrounds. It's good to have, and what I would say, Finian, is and I suspect that you're doing the same thing I am, which is not just maintaining that at a local level, but trying to encourage people like we are right now on this podcast, where we're trying to get that word out to other people who are probably if they're already listening to this, they probably already know that there's some things coming down the pike that are probably not going to be very good for them. And I think that they're trying to glean that information. And me, rather than just being radio silent and, you know, continuing to load mags, which is what I was doing when I realized that my mute button was off, and I thought, uh-oh, people can probably hear that. But the idea is that at some point we will be radio silent. I don't know when that is. I would say that there's indicators that you could probably follow. If you see bank holidays, if you see gold spike insanely, if you see that all of a sudden there's no more ammunition available online, you know, that type of thing. You know, there was a time when you had to wait in Walmart for ammunition to show up every Thursday morning at 7 o'clock. I remember that. I remember when there was a run on ammunition.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's not going to be a big problem, though, for very long, because you can get metal 3D printers for 2K now. So you can print the guns and the ammo if you really want to.
Well, based on what I think is coming, there's going to be plenty of guns and ammo just laying around. You just have to go pick it up.
Yeah. So about
but you should still have what you need in advance.
That's right. Yeah.
Don't wait to buy it until it's too late. Right.
Yeah, this is not the time to say I'm not going to worry about that. Not disagreeing with you, but probably securing those capabilities for 3D printing weapons and things like that are absolutely important. I think that that's a good idea. I think
it's already been secured, I think, this week.
No, I'm talking about individuals, people who actually have 3D printers that say, you know what, I've got files. I'm not going to print anything. Maybe I live in a place where I can't do this. You know, there might be people in other countries, right, where things like that aren't allowed.
Yeah,
what
like
I would
mine.
say, right, and I wasn't trying to be too specific, but what I would say is that if you've got an in with a 3D printer and you've got the files and you have enough money, chances are you can get them to print just about anything that you want.
As of 2013, 3D printed bullets exist and they are very easy to make, according to Huffington Post. So it must be at least feasible.
Well, of course, Huffington Post is willing to hype up anything that makes guns look like they're too accessible. So, I mean, it might be harder than they're trying to make it out to be, and they might leave out a whole lot of steps in order to make it seem that way.
Yeah.
You can 3D print missiles.
I load my own ammunition, so I'm going to color me skeptic on being able to 3D print ammunition, although I'm down for when you can start to 3D print EFP, like explosive form penetrators, because that would be cool.
Hang on, I'm going to share this in the Hangout chat so you guys can see it. This is off of 3dprinterchat.com. Raytheon's made a missile with 3D printed parts. You can make it definitely with for 9mm, quite easily apparently.
How reliably?
Is this just the bullets? Because anybody can cast bullets. It's very easy, low tech.
No, I know, but this is like the ammo, the cartridge, the whole 9 yards. You could basically make with a 3D printer if you really wanted to. You can make less lethal or fully lethal rounds.
I'm wondering if they're 3D printing gunpowder, because I doubt that.
No, that's probably not. But you can make that. Honestly, that's been something that's been made ever since like the 1600s from charcoal, saltpeter, and like urine. It's really not hard to make gunpowder if you know the basic ingredients.
That may be true, but I'll remain skeptical on the powder side, namely because
powder's been around for centuries, mate. It's been something that everybody could make. It did make in their backyard in England for ages.
Right, not a groundbreaking statement. My point is that there are literally thousands of available powder types that will get you consistent results, and trying to replicate just those loads with that specific powder is a challenge for reloaders around the world. As it is, none of them are making their own powder. So I would suspect that if powder were to be all of a sudden not available, you might not get the same consistency that people are expecting out of their rifles, specifically rifles, because again, pistols are only to fight your way back to your rifle, which you shouldn't have left behind in the first place.
That's
The
fair
ammo,
enough.
the ammo thing. This is one of many tangible things that people should be purchasing in advance, and it's even if you don't have a rifle that fires that rifle cartridge, you should be buying it because it's literally gold on a shelf. Ammo, you can always sell it later if you have to, or barter and trade for it. It's something that you can keep in your house relatively safe that lasts basically forever as long as you take good care of it. So yeah, you should have all the ammo you need to start, as you can economically afford. And then beyond that, it's a great investment. I mean, I know another guy that he buys it by the pallet and he buys low and sells high and he makes thousands and thousands of dollars on it. He just waits until, in the past, like when 22 long rifle, you could not get it anymore. Well, he bought it, like I did at 4 or 5 cents a round, and he was selling it for over 20. So, I mean, the guy made a killing off of it. And of course, I don't think he sold it all. He keeps his own little stockpile, but stuff like that's another wise thing that, people that are paying attention do to make a decent amount of money on the side. But yeah, I would keep your ammo. If you have the gun and you need it in advance, or you're going to need it in the future, you should have the ammo for it already. Like, don't wait to buy it when you can't, or it's been made illegal, or they put 1,000% tax on it.
Right.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so just before we get too far into this particular subject to come out, let's get like slightly back on track and discuss what the elites might be stockpiling. Finian, you might have somewhat insight onto this because you might have been looking into what they're stockpiling, so you can see if you can stockpile similar things. So if anybody has insight here, let me know. But Finian came on a little later, so I want to hear from him first.
It's a pretty sad and unfortunate scenario, but it gets back to what I was saying earlier. 5 million people died in the first Great Depression, and it was not a global. I mean, it was slightly global, but the next one will be like full-fledged global. So what the so-called elites and rich plan to do, and it's a wise plan, is they're just going to out-survive people because, the saying is true. 3 days of no food, there's total chaos, and then 7 days people are eating each other. So all they have to do is live in a bunker or in a secure area for about a month, and then what percentage of the population is going to be dead? It's going to be a very large percentage. So yeah, all they have to do is prepare to survive for a month maybe, and that's just basic food and survival gear. And again, everybody else should be doing the same thing if you're paying attention, because that will happen. And like, imagine an urban area that has no food. I mean, we have modern day examples of it. I mean, Venezuela, they're killing all of the zoo animals. All the people's pets are dead. They apparently down there, like 1 silver coin buys you 6 months of food, and people are buying and selling houses for a single gold coin. That's another thing to pay attention to, and that's, the governments of the world and the rich are putting a large stockpile of their wealth into gold and silver for a reason, because it preserves their wealth over bad times. But yeah, they're doing things to make sure they survive when they know a lot of other people are going to be killing each other, basically. A major unrest, civil unrest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you want to keep your financial security in that situation, the best option is physical metal, gold and silver in particular. Silver is the one that's cheapest, so that's the one I recommend buying because it's also rapidly becoming rarer than gold. It's one of the few metals that's used in practically absolutely everything, including computers, industry, medicine, you name it, it's there. And it's used in ways that can't be recovered, whereas gold is used in ways where it can. So jewelry and things like that, you can recover the gold back by melting it down and everything else. Whereas with silver, it's usually dealt with as a fine dust, so you can't really melt it back down. It's incredibly hard to mine compared to some other metal, well, like gold, for example. It's a byproduct, usually, of another form of mining that goes on, and then you have to run it through a bunch of other processes to get it really pure. it's not easy to make silver compared to gold, but there is more of it compared to gold in the earth. That said, we've mined most of what we can.
Yeah, there's been no major discoveries of large sources of either gold or silver, and it's supposedly true. It might just be a rumor, but apparently even places like Mexico, they say that they're running out. But the only
Yeah.
thing really you need to keep track of with silver in relationship to gold is the gold to silver ratio. And traditionally, it's been closer to 10 to 1 in the past, and it comes out of the ground at about that ratio. But the price currently is like 80 to 1. So just do the basic math. Like if you're going to buy one, buy silver, because when this does happen, that's going to go up by that much more.
Yes, I would
Exactly.
agree. And I would agree.
There's some people predicting a $900 per ounce ranking for silver by the end of the collapse.
And it is relatively inexpensive now, like Finian was saying, as far as the 1 to 80 ratio. And watching that ratio go to 120 is a really good indicator for people who, maybe if you are a fan of Dave Ramsey and you say, I'm going to have my 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses put back for emergencies and things like that, because again, it's going to be hard to pay your mortgage during the early stages of the collapse with maybe gold or ammunition. And I'm not trying to be sarcastic in saying that you'll defend your home from the bank taking it. But my point is, and that did happen during the Depression, by the way.
And all the assets, like in terms of gold and silver, but like because they like FDR fucking raided people. I make this point a fuck ton because people, like especially liberals, they like to think of FDR as a saint and he's stopped the Great Depression and blah blah. But really, all he did was like he had really strong legs for a time, and he used them to kick the can down the road. And then when he was old and decrepit, his wife took over and started kicking the can with him, and they just kept on like kicking it so far down the road that basically they didn't solve shit. They just didn't have to deal with it. And it's really, really funny when you start looking at like that, because like if they can look like they're handling the situation, they don't need to actually handle shit. And that's a lot of the way the Royals deal with it. They profit, they collect, and they get all this veneration and a relatively cushy job. And then all they have to do is keep kicking that can down the line so that it doesn't happen here and it doesn't happen now.
You reminded me, Jeremiah, about we were talking about the tricks that they can play to prolong this game. And I forgot to bring this up. I wanted to earlier. One of the tricks that is probably coming that has been talked about a lot on higher levels, like the Rob Kirby's and all these, analysts and basically that have been talking about it. And that is that they're going to confiscate people's 401ks. And people at first, they're totally shocked. Like, no way, that could never happen. But yeah, that's probably something that they could do. The government of the United States could say, you know what, we're going to nationalize this because the stock market crashed by this much money and that's horrible and we can't have that. And, now you'll just get a steady 5% a year and we're just going to take your money from you.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things to keep in mind. I have a lot of people that I work with and that I know that all of their wealth is tied up at a typical 401k. And I don't have a dime in one. And I haven't for years and I won't. It's not worth the employer match. That's Dave Ramsey gets into that. He's like, oh, definitely do that. And, you're going to make all this money. If you look into the true stats on how much money is actually made in the stock market, it's not that much. You're better off being in precious metals.
Yeah, that's one place where I actually part ways with Dave Ramsey. Now, I will tell you, Roth, like a Roth IRA, is pretty good. But again, this is where diversification comes into play because I'm not getting younger, and so part of my diversification plan is to have a plan in place if the collapse doesn't occur, just the same as if it were. And I will tell you, that is a lot more expensive. When you have to diversify metals, ammunition, and I jokingly say bourbon because I post a lot of pictures of me drinking bourbon on Twitter.
Hey,
But
Jeremiah would
Mike.
know. Yeah, Jeremiah would know. I brew my own mead, and I consider it gold on a shelf.
oh,
Well,
absolutely.
and me, like I'm more of a rum person. To me, it's always gonna be fucking rum. Like Bacardi Superior is my lifeblood if I have it.
Yeah, no, but the point is to have a level of diversification that is broader than the other people that are saying, I'm banking on the fact that the central planners will be able to steer us out of the next great depression. It's not going to happen, or if it does, it won't have that much of an impact. And so the idea is to have a level of diversification that, in my opinion, is probably twice as expensive as to what you actually need, what the experts say you're supposed to have when it's time to retire. I think they're saying something around $1 million in assets or more when it's time to retire. And what I would tell you is that if they're saying that, for you to be able to retire factoring in inflation, not hyperinflation, then that means it's either going to be more, or you're just not going to have as plushy a retirement as what you're thinking. Because, you know, if you diversify to the point where you say, okay, I'm going to have some put back because, you know, we already know that socialist insecurity is not going to last, and we know that it already has an end date as far as when it goes bankrupt. We already know that, and I think they're saying 2030.
Hey, how dare you? If there are enough kids popped out, they can pay for the next generations of old people. Come on.
And ironically, they are actually saying that part of the reason why this problem is going to be exacerbated is because people are having fewer kids.
Yep.
And so
And
what
that's
that
because they're
means,
broke.
yeah, they're broke. Groceries are expensive. There was a couple years ago, my wife looked at me and she was like, we're spending $1,000 a month on groceries.
Yeah, I
And
pay way more a month for food than I do for my mortgage.
yeah,
And this is why I'm saying that it's actually worse in America than it is in Britain, because I don't pay that much comparatively for food.
Yeah, here the
well, we had
packages are
three.
getting smaller and the prices are going up. It's really bad.
It's true, and you know, we had three teenagers at the time, and of course, you know, everybody knows that teenagers will empty a refrigerator if you don't put a lock on it. And you know, we were going through that process, you know, of how expensive it was, and everything that she made was from scratch. Everything that she made, because she wanted to try to steer us out of all the different chemical based, just add water type cooking, and try to keep us toward the less processed foods. And you know, this was years ago, but you know, if you actually shopped at Whole Foods, now I'm not plugging Whole Foods here. I'm just saying, if you were to go to less processed foods and go to someplace like Whole Foods and get your food, it would be a lot more expensive. And I think that this is where the toll of inflation has been hidden. For one, food is not listed in the inflation CPI, consumer price indexing. The things that are actually impacted the most are the things that are not listed. So that when you see the CPI and you say, "Oh, inflation's not that bad," well, you know what they don't include? They don't include utilities. They don't include energy costs, and they don't include fuel like
They
gas.
do in Britain.
They
Not here
don't
in the
hear me.
U.S. Not here in the
Yeah.
U.S. And they don't include food.
You know, this is the one of the questions. If I ever have a discussion with somebody about economics and we're talking about a collapse and if it's going to come or not, and they're like, "Oh no, it's never going to happen. It's going to be fine." I'll wait 5 to 10 minutes. I'll be polite and civil with them, and then I'll have a follow-up question. I was like, "Do you know what shadowstats.com is?" And if they look like they have no idea or they say no, that's it. I Everything they just told me, I throw out. I completely ignore anything else they say because they have no idea what they're talking about. And that happened to me last week. There was a guy, he had no idea what Shadow Stats was. And Shadow Stats tracks true inflation, true unemployment, and true debt numbers of the government, at least in the United States. And you can't talk intelligently about this discussion or this topic without having that as one of your sources of information. Because if you're just going to go off what like Fox News is telling you or some ridiculous crap like that, fake news basically, you'll have no idea when this happens. You're going to think, oh, it's going to go on forever and we're all going to be fine. And you're just going to be totally surprised when 90% of your 401k disappears. And yeah, for people like that, like if that's how clueless you are, well, you know, good luck, because you're going to be screwed.
You know, ironically, the government actually subscribes to shadow stats. And this is something that I read either from him or maybe it might have been Peter Schiff that had mentioned it. But they actually subscribe to shadow stats so that they can keep track of the real number, because they're so used to fucking the number up in the way that they report it. They actually lose track of their work, sort of like long division, right? You do long division, you show your work, right? Well, they have so many different equations that factor in being able to hide the CPI and the M3, by the way, that they actually lose track of their own numbers. Of course, this is the government we're talking about. And so they actually subscribe to shadow stats so that they can keep track of the numbers themselves by looking at his reports. I thought that was kind of comical.
Yeah, things are so bad and most people have no idea how bad they are. I mean, you mentioned M3 and like that's another question I'll ask people. Like, do you know what the Exchange Stabilization Fund is? And if they have no idea, then that's another sign of trouble, because like you need to go out and look that up, because like the Rob Kirby's of the world, they're saying that there's a whole other 21 plus trillion. So it's not 21 trillion in debt that the United States has. It's at least 42 trillion. And it's probably way more than that. Like some of these shelters and all these pallets of money that have just been shipped all over the world, all this stuff that's being built that nobody knows about, it's all going into these just bottomless pits, basically. And nobody knows for sure how much is really out there, which is another reason why I know when it comes back, basically, to the U.S., our money will be useless, which is why I tell people, prepare for the day when your fiat buys nothing, because that's the best case scenario for you to survive it.
And Mike Maloney, we talked about him earlier. His graphical representation of that bullshit and how bad it can get is so very, very angering the first time you see it. And I've shown that to so many people who just end up shaking with anger and never wanting to think about it again. And many more, honestly, and this is what I was surprised by, who remember it well enough that they later on like pass me by on the street and say, yeah, taxation is theft. Like we'll have sort of a secret handshake where I'll say, hey, taxation is theft, and then they'll say, it sure is, taxation is theft. It'll be like the thing on Easter when churchgoers, it'll be like the thing on Easter where churchgoers say, he is risen indeed, to each other. But you know, that graphical representation shows you that it's not even there. Like the 42 trillion and then like whatever else is stored up in assets and real estate and shit. Oh my god, it's just the surface. It's the tip of the fucking iceberg. It's so fucking comical, dude.
There's a brilliant YouTube channel called Greatest Truth Never Told, which has been doing videos on silver and gold for probably as long as Maloney has. And this guy has basically bought the farm on silver. He is such a silver buff, it's ridiculous. And he got me into silver quite heavily as well, to be quite frank. He did a infographic on the futures and derivatives, the debt, and all of the fiat money systems, and then basically did this giant pyramid showing it all. And
wait, he did it to scale. Linked? Is this the democracy.info thing that I just linked? Because that's what I wanted to share. It's like an upside-down pyramid.
Yeah, it's an upside-down pyramid, and I think it was the Demonocracy one. He had a few critiques of it because it was basically putting all the focus on gold and crypto. and he was arguing that there should be more focus on silver because that's equally as important to the portfolio.
Yeah, Silver Shield is Chris Dwayne, I think is his name. He's got videos out there that
That's
also
the bunny.
talk about this. Yeah, it's the same thing, but yeah, silver is a small little sliver at the very top of the gold pyramid or triangle, whatever you want to call it. It's gonna, and anybody that that they don't understand the situation that we're in economically at a global level, they just need to go look at that graphic. It's a single graphic, and you don't have to be an economist to understand that it shows a picture of a very grave scenario that can't be fixed without a collapse.
I call it a reset. For them, it's probably a reset. That's probably the way they look at it.
Yeah, or they might even consider it a wealth cycle.
Yes,
they're not going to walk. Yeah, they're not going to walk away from this poor.
Right. Mike Maloney calls it the world's greatest wealth transfer. That's the term that he has for it.
Yeah, everything fiat based or fiat backed will become worthless. And maybe, we're not sure, but it's possible that all debts will be canceled. But that doesn't mean that you're going to get your house for free. It'll just be redenominated in the new currency. So you'll still owe that bank something.
Yeah, what they may do is they may renegotiate some of the debt based on certain central banking decisions and stuff like that, and that is always possible. But I mean, the best way to do it is to own where you live. That's really the best thing. And anybody who takes a 30-year mortgage and doesn't pay it off early they're really just throwing money away, because you can usually, with I think it's like a 20 or 30% increase in your monthly payment, you can usually pay it off in like 15 years or something like that. And if you don't, you've basically given them like 60 or 70% more. I mean, the numbers are ridiculous. And those are the things that I actually like about Dave Ramsey, is that those types of things that he really works on. Like, don't have debt. If you're going to go to college for something that is going to make money, and don't take student loans, because student loans is another bubble that, quite frankly, that's going to collapse. And I think that it's also created a sort of like it's almost created its own, oh, you got to have a bachelor's degree for this, or oh, you've got to have a master's degree, and those types of things. And it's kind of overinflated some parts, some jobs and job descriptions. And what'll happen is you'll end up with, needing a PhD, at some point in the future to be able to, do, disposal, waste disposal services or something like that.
Well, that's a simple function of the market, so mate.
Well, sure. But, it's interesting that it's come back around, and now they're like, look, we need people in the trade industry. We need people with skills and trades that are not degrees, but are certification programs. A couple years back, I went into a welding certification, and I went ahead and got some welding certifications out of the way. I don't do it professionally, but I do it on the side as a hobby. And every now and then I have somebody come up and say, hey, I got this thing on my trailer hitch that I'd like to change, or I need this changed, and I'll weld it up for them, and sometimes we're able to barter something out of it, or I make a new friend, which is also good. But that's one of those skill sets that I think is good, is having multiple skill sets. I do side work, as a gunsmith. I actually worked under a gunsmith for a good number of years. I got a good amount of training in that area. And so, of course, it saves me a lot of money building my own guns, but it also enables me to be able to help other people by helping them build their own guns, save them money, that type of thing. And I try to offer those. I can give some insights and things like that to people that are maybe new to the whole process, and I don't know what to do, and where do I go find this, or where do I go find that? And I try to offer that. But one of the things I wanted to mention, we were on the subject of gold and how there's a limited amount of gold. And so I'm trying to get back around, as far as what the elites are investing in. And one of the things that I had conveyed to me, and I don't remember where I heard it or saw it, but they actually made a diagram that showed approximately the amount of gold that has been removed from the earth. And they said that it was about the size of a tennis court. And I think they said if you filled a tennis court, edge to edge, end to end, and I think they said 6 feet, that is the total amount of gold that has been removed and recycled from other things, those gadgets used, and then they try to recycle the gold, like some of the earlier cell phones and laptops had more gold in it than they do now. But yeah, it was kind of interesting that they basically said it's about the size of a tennis court. And that actually really surprised me.
Well, it's a very heavy metal.
Let's invite this next person to introduce himself. This is Sarcasm and Liberty on Twitter. Why don't you let people know where else you can be found, and who you are, what you do, and what your general thoughts on the subject so far are.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And we've also discussed like best case like collapse scenarios and what to do to prepare for them. But we would love to hear your insight on the primary subject here, which is the New World Order, one world government, etc. So what are your insights on that particular subject so far? Because I know you're a veteran, so you could probably say something about it.
Well, okay, like here's the thing too. I grew up in a really fundamental, conservative. Say there were things, Well, completely separate.
The military that is there on the ground is literally doing the grunt work for the policy agenda, and that agenda is being set by people that are not us.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, the UN is there to basically shape that policy, and the UN is influenced by the stakeholders that are, or the stockholders. Sorry, I was corrected earlier. The stockholders that basically want those resources, and of course they're there under the premises of we're going to help these Africans here.
Oh, well, yeah, I would say that's always the premise. I mean, if to just
the UN was designed to do something very similar to prevent yet another world war from being able to occur. And the way that they set it up created distinct power blocks, because you have the General Assembly and then you have the Special Assembly, which consists of the founders. Now, the founders include pretty much every major Western country, Russia, and China. Now, the fact that Russia and China have had a very good alliance for a very large portion, well, the entirety of the existence of the UN, has prevented a lot of UN activity from occurring. There've been, I mean, to my knowledge, there have been probably about 20 major UN-related incidents. The ones that everybody will know of is Bosnia, Korea, and the lesser-known one of the Hutu genocide that happened in, oh God, where was it? Rwanda? Yeah, that was it.
Rwanda.
Yeah, Rwanda. Former Zimbabwe.
Yeah. But to be fair to the UN on that one, they never got the soldiers for that one. because, and this is actually the reason why I never liked Clinton, or Madeleine Albright. I knew he was trash from this incident alone.
I was just gonna say, like, that you only needed one reason to not like Clinton.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can pick from a list, to be fair.
Yeah,
just one is enough, and I think this one is enough as well, because the UN was begging for support. Literally, the general in charge was a former U.S. general. I think his name was Fox, and he basically begged for support from Madeleine Albright, and she just went, no. And countless died. It was totally senseless.
That is because they had a reason for that. And quite frankly, it very well could have been something as simple. And looking back, looking back in the future to reflect on this small scale is very similar to what they may actually have plans for the whole entire Earth, which is that simple goal may have been that they just needed a depopulation technique or capability, where they lowered the population because it had outlived its existing infrastructure for the use of the elites at the time. And so they use these democides or genocides. I make the distinction between them is just simply because democide is just death by government. And the stats from University of Hawaii, I think, on democide are phenomenal, because government is the world's leading killer. And I thought that was really interesting. But reducing that local population was really the goal. And then what they do is they will say, well, see, what happened was we didn't have the amount of funding that we needed for the UN, or we didn't have, this infrastructure there. And so, see, this is why we need to have the world's policemen everywhere, is so that things like this don't happen. And so it just becomes a justification for future expenditures.
The problem is that by that logic, the people in charge would have had contingency plans for the fallout from that event. And most people think that all of the Hutu were just completely wiped out. That isn't actually the case. I mean, even I used to think that. I thought every single one of them got completely butchered. But a lot of them fled, obviously. I mean, 2 million people fled to like Zaire and surrounding countries, fearing basically reprisals from the military. And eventually they wound up staging 2 wars in the Congo over this. I mean, there was insurgencies, refugee crises. This thing created a huge amount of fallout. I mean, I'm just wikiing it now, because I always like to refresh myself when I'm going through these things. And there's pages of stuff as to what actually wound up happening as a result of Rwanda. And there are people still on like war crimes lists. If they're found today, they'll basically go to prison for the rest of their lives. It isn't something that one can just plan as this is what we can do, because it didn't result in those things necessarily as well. It resulted in a different set of actions, because the most recent events haven't had much UN support. Things like the Afghan war between America and Afghanistan, I think that was an AUMF war, basically. That was built off the Patriot Act. It didn't really get, I think did it get congressional approval? I can't remember.
We'll file the proper paperwork later.
The president.
Because
the president has the authority.
Because the president can authorize strikes, but
I want to say like 30.
Play around with people, and if they can beat them in a certain period of time, it's not really a war.
Well, that's
it's
what
a
Obama
really
was
bad
doing
class.
Too.
I know. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying
Obama that exact same game too. Like you don't,
and that's what's the most hilarious. Okay, so we have this fucking legal system which is supposed to protect people, and then let's take this legal system, have codifications that are really fucking old for what's qualified as war, and then let's beef up all of our technology with gold plating and a bunch of other fucking just things like benefiting the military industrial complex and making the US more fucking powerful. And then afterwards, let's say not decrease that amount of time that it means a war so that we can effectively wage the kinds of wars that were waged in the past and called wars and kill many more people, and like many more people per capita out of the fucking place get injured and shit. But like, we won't call it a war. It's not a war. It's just a military action.
No, yeah, the conflict. It's not a war. Mm-hmm.
Collapse Tyranny, if you're loading some MMA, can you mute, please?
Oh, I just real quick. I wanted to say, but before
that is much more complex because it's all about optics. It's all about how people perceive something. So, like you said, because he said Operation Enduring Freedom has ended, people think, oh, the war's over. And then Operation New Dawn is something different. When in fact, it's exactly the same war, doing exactly the same things, just with a prettier sounding name. So everybody feels nice and fluffy. And it's nothing to feel fluffy about. You're still sending drones to kill people and make Pakistani children cry.
I was working as a contractor, and like my job at that time was I was in Wisconsin. Another a long time ago.
Country that got towers pulled down, or sorry, statues pulled down by ropes, and fucking effigies of foreign leaders being burned, and all of this because of people that they put in. And then, you know, this is the same country that has the audacity to cry about Russia possibly sending some info about this election. Like, this country meddles in every other fucking nation, and they help people do it. And that always pisses me off. It fucking infuriates me, even though I sound just like amused right now. But it's fucking.
But no,
it's infuriating.
Jeremiah.
You're right.
But wait, where those 12 Russian GRU agents apparently, all the charges that were filed against them, basically, you change the name of like 12 Russian agents or whatever to DOJ, and it mimics exactly one of the cases that's currently against the DOJ for hacking the election.
Yeah.
It's fucking hilarious to watch this, because
anyway, you were going to say something though?
Oh yeah, with regards to the marketing component, I really don't think I can stress this enough. People do not understand how powerful a tool marketing really is. And I think Sarcasm Liberty, you glimpsed it with Enduring Freedom New Dawn. But it's far deeper than that, because every single newspaper outlet in the mainstream media is part of Operation Mockingbird. And they've done a very good job to keep this sort of thing quiet, but we all know that CIA agents like Brennan and co, they go on these big news channels and they do their blurbs about how Trump's a traitor for trying to talk peace with Russia, and how he's somehow showing weakness by discrediting the intelligence agencies for having bad intel, when we have proven repeatedly that they have had bad intel. So it's this concept of trying to massage people's brains into thinking that it is all still fluffy. We are still in control. We still do really know what we're doing. Honest, we do, when they don't have a fucking clue. Well, now, they do this everywhere, though. They do this. It's very interesting to watch, though, how they do it, because it's things like the Overton window, where they slowly move the scale of what is acceptable further and further away from sort of the mainstream center norm. And it happens a lot during periods like back in the McCarthy days. There was a lot of Hollywood people screaming about how communists were being unfairly targeted and stuff when they themselves were spreading shit tons of propaganda. There was loads of I mean, it's constant throughout history if you actually look for it.
And you want to talk the Overton window? This is fucking exciting because Overton window is fucking nuts, yo. Overton window. Okay, so Trump is a perfect example of this. What Trump will do is he'll say something outrageous, and everybody will be like, ha 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 ha, rub rub rub. He's so dumb. He's so arrogant. His hands are small. Blah blah. And they'll say that, and then after they say that, they're so bent against that particular version of what he said that anything that lands slightly less extreme is suddenly fine because they've gotten used to that. So he moves it quicker than most people move it. So he can say something similar to like, take the guns first, due process later. And then as long as he doesn't do that, he can do whatever he wants with guns. And this is very clear because there have been a shit ton more gun control legislations, even some federal, on the books ever since he said that. And nobody gives a shit.
Yeah. No, people it's funny because people will defend it too.
Out of left move along, and then the Overton window's broken because they can see the facts don't match with what they're being told.
Has it ever occurred to you that maybe that's part of the story within a story thing that they do regularly? I mean, you want to talk marketing. The CIA story within a story bullshit is tried and true and well tested.
Yeah, but that implies that the CIA actually wants Trump to do something, and I don't think the CIA wants that.
First off, yes, they do, but that's like my personal idea. But second off, I'm saying like I'm branding it the CIA story within a story stuff so that people can look into that themselves. But this is something that can be done by any major organization with media clout. Not just the CIA, everybody, because all you have to do is package enough rabbit holes into your story that people will likely be led down one of them and think that's the truth. And then all you have to do is keep them on that track. They'll fucking forget the rest of it. Well, I promise it works.
I mean, there's the story within the story for Russiagate.
I would say exactly what you said, Jeremiah. Just like person
time ever doing that. So if you watch carefully when Trump is moving around or he's on some kind of transitional space, he has his own private security there. He doesn't trust the Secret Service, and he has good reason to. He's making again, I'm not saying I like the guy, but he's making lots of enemies and he's doing stuff that's pissing off a lot of the wrong people, including the CIA, I think. There's no way in the world they're his friends. I mean,
no way.
Imagine I don't know if you guys tracked what happened in Helsinki, but basically when Trump and Putin were up there and how friendly Trump was being to him, the intel agencies...
you're breathing into the mic pretty heavy real quick.
I'm sorry, mate.
The intel agencies of the West are just like, they're going bonkers crazy over it because they just can't understand it. And I think one of the things that Trump is doing, I think he's in it to troll people. That's part of it. He knows that he was being set up, basically. I still think he was put in office to oversee the bankruptcy of the United States. But he's not dumb either. So he knows all this is going on, and he's also going after pedophiles. And he's got a lot of people on his side that are also going after those same pedophiles. And, there's got the whole QAnon thing, and some people have, all this kinds of... they have confidence, basically, that he's going to be some kind of great savior. I don't believe that. If I see powerful people like the Clintons going to prison, then maybe I'll start to believe some of this is true. But there is a lot of strangeness going on, like the Helsinki thing, his own personal security, him saying these wild, crazy things on Twitter and stuff. He's not under the control that the oligarchs and the banking families and all the people in the U.S. that have normally controlled past presidents. Trump is not under that same amount of control. I don't know exactly, again, what his goals are, and what he's going to ultimately do, but it's interesting. It's something to pay attention to.
I would agree. Like, it seems like he is, I don't know, I would go as far as to say, like, pretty much out of control in the sense that, you know, like, it doesn't seem, sometimes it seems like,
I forget his fucking name because I'm terrible with names. And like, I don't write a script for this shit largely. I could just go off memory. So the Breitbart editor at large was on Bill Maher, Real Time with Bill Maher recently. And Bill Maher asked him why he doesn't cover Russia. Well, he said he didn't cover Russia because every mainstream outlet was already doing it, and he wanted to be the outlet for people who wanted a different story, who wanted stories that weren't Russia, that weren't all of these, you know, various gates that that came out, and he wanted to cover the news that wasn't being covered by the mainstream because he didn't just want to be more clicks. Now, if you start to think about the ramifications of such a statement, you start to think of the people in charge being like, yeah, say whatever that crazy shit is you want, because as long as you do, everybody's going to be focused on that. Let them eat cake. Fuck them. That's what that is. Okay.
Yeah.
He's not under control. He's just good at controlling the narrative. And so they let him have more reign. So reasonably, let me let you finish, Finian, and then you go looping it. But that's my take on it. He's a reality show host. Yo.
I would agree.
Begin it with saying this is a very dangerous conversation, but I'll come out and say it. I don't care what people think or if I get in trouble for it. I don't understand why we should be enemies with Russia. Culturally, you know.
Oh yeah,
we have a lot in common, and you know they have a lot of common enemies to us too.
And let's be real specific. The other day when I was on a stream, I said that I trust Russia if I had to pick. If I dead last gun to my head had to pick to trust Russia or the U.S. more in terms of which government was closer to the truth in what they were telling the people, etc. Blah blah. I said I would be with Russia because I would be, because this country fucking sucks.
Yeah, the problem is it's back to the narrative thing, but like what you guys were just talking about, the mainstream media, the fake news, the military-industrial complex, whatever you want to call them, even the intel agencies, they want to promote this image or this reality where we have this animosity and we have a reason to stay at war, and Russia's a great way to keep all that going. You know, it keeps all the money being spent, it keeps all the people focused on the wrong things, and I just simply disagree with it. I don't think that conflict should be there, and I don't like people promoting it.
Shouldn't.
I think that's
It really shouldn't.
And two things, let's be really clear. Ordo ab chaos, divide and conquer. Never let a good let a good crisis go to waste. All of these fucking things said by the elites, and these elites love Bernays. Bernays, a propagandist. Bernays who helped with things like Mockingbird's success, and all of this shit is run. It's controlled. It's not out of control.
Like, to go off of what Finian said, it's obvious. Like something. There's kind of rational, and
likes her, and all of these things contribute to the general image of competition between the two. But anybody looking at this can see that there is something bigger here. That these candidates were selected.
Point of order.
Yeah.
Point of order, mate.
Controlled opposition.
I could accept controlled opposition were it not for the fact that the people who are currently, for the most part, in power are losing their collective minds. Literally. And most people with rational brains
How do you know that?
This. Because I talk to them in the States. I talk to people like my family who
are in government?
No, they're not in government. But they are familiar with it, or they. I mean, my family is all ex-military. They all, they are family of military mates. So let me explain.
Yeah.
It's none of them believe the Russiagate thing, and none of them believe Russia is a threat. In fact, they want the same as you and Finian and I do, which is us to try and have better ties with Russia, actually have a trading arrangement with them, get them into the global economy like they should be, because they could be as much of a powerhouse as anybody else, and they've got shit tons of resources we could use.
Oh,
And
okay,
those
sure.
kinds of things are important.
But the
Those
elites
are the
aren't
things that really-
necessarily losing their minds. You're seeing public.
I'm not talking
care.
about the elites. I'm
Okay,
talking
so
about.
why does it matter if it's controlled
talking
in
about-
this way or if it's controlled opposition in terms of what the public perceives?
I think he's talking
'Cause-
about like the intel agency heads and all these people that are going after Trump like rabid dogs.
They're not losing their minds.
Exactly.
They're fine with
are.
this.
I'm not being funny, mate. If they were fine with it, they'd let it go. They wouldn't
No, if
be
they're fine
going
with it, they'll help the narrative.
But the narrative at the moment for Trump is peacemaker.
That's
This
half
is
of
what
it.
I'd say. That's most of it.
That's not most of it. There's plenty of people in like who would benefit from either side of this being the common public perception. Come on, really?
Who? They want him. They want him to be a demon.
So, oh, dude,
how is
if
being
he's
a peacemaker a demon?
Hire demon hunter.
What?
If he's a demon, you can hire demon hunters. What?
No, I'm saying he's a demon in the eyes of his enemies. This is how he's tried to be. No, it's not maybe. That's how he's portrayed.
Or maybe his enemies aren't really his enemies. Be fair.
Yeah,
I'm not seeing evidence of that.
I see plenty of evidence.
I thought they were trying to paint Trump as a traitor and treasonous just for what happened in Helsinki, though. Those are the people that are losing their minds over,
or maybe they're not.
I don't see why you can say that. They're pretty freaked, mate. Honestly, the way that they are going at this, they wanted Russia to be the boogeyman for the next 40, 50 years. And he's killing that goal. Because remember, the Genie pipe, not maybe, definitely, Genie pipeline, that thing is going to die on its ass because of Trump. And that thing has been part of their plan for 40 years. It's not something they're willing to give up lightly. And that's why they're screaming at him.
Covering that.
I'm not familiar with that name. Are you talking about the pipeline through Syria? I never heard of it.
The pipeline, yeah, the one that it's by a company called Genie is the one running it, apparently. They're an Israeli company. They want to run a pipeline up through from, I think it was Saudi Arabia. And I mean,
with the Russians for European gas. Yep.
Well, to completely corner the market from the Russians, more likely, because they'll prefer to buy from a source that's Western allied than Russian, because there'll be less chance of sanctions as well.
Look, let's be really clear here. Have they started taking guns without due process?
Huh?
Have they started
there
taking
are too many
guns
people
without due
talking
process?
Where, in America?
Yeah, have they started taking guns without due process, the way Trump said it was going to happen?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so we've already established that Trump is not going to kill anything because he doesn't even follow through on what he says the next week. We're talking about somebody who can keep the narrative so scattered that nobody can follow it. And if you think that the people freaking out over this are genuinely freaking out, I would say that you're believing a narrative about Trump and simultaneously disbelieving its core tenets. But that's me on a separate scale. I could go on that for hours.
I don't know what to believe about Trump. That's the God's honest truth. I have no idea. I have no idea where this guy is going to go next. He is incredibly unpredictable.
Well, there you go.
To be that way, yeah.
And I don't know if that is a script. I don't know if that is one way or another. But I try and use Occam's razor for this at the moment. And right now, all I can think is it's him. It's just him being him.
Except that Occam's razor also says that the simplest solution is often the truest. And the simplest way that this goes is that it's going the way it always has been, and he's not a disruptor.
Well, evidence is saying otherwise to me, because he's disrupting things. Well, no, he's disrupting things.
According to the
Yeah, how can
mainstream
one say
narrative,
that he
are you
is
just gonna
not?
believe that? So are we going Occam's razor based on
Wait,
what we know,
no, hang
or
on,
what they
hang on
want
a
us to
second.
think?
How is it mainstream narrative that he's
Dude, really?
disrupting the media?
Really?
Yes,
What?
I'm asking. I'm asking.
Dude, look up anything on Trump right now, and most of the mainstream media is going to tell you how much of a Hitler he's being, and how against the press he is, and how against everything that's been wrought for peace he is, and all of that blah blah. And so, if you want to tell me that you buy Occam's razor, I'm wondering which team you're on, because you're essentially saying, I believe the simplest, and here's the simplest according to the mainstream, so that's what I believe. But I think we believe.
No. That's
But I,
not what I was saying.
but I think we believe certain core things that separate us from that mainstream narrative, and in doing so, the Occam's razor solution to this fucking changes.
Well, the Occam's razor solution flips. It means that the mainstream media narrative is lying about Trump consistently.
And it
That
is
is-
obviously, but like it's also to say that because of what we know about bloodlines and history and blah blah, that Trump is probably not accidental.
I don't think he was. I really am not convinced he was on purpose. I'm really not.
Okay, well then you're
Or
not using
not
Occam's
by
razor
that
according to
side.
what we know.
Well,
I think-
no,
I
but
do-
this is the point. No,
if
hang
I
on,
can
hang on.
ju-
One
if I can-
sec,
Okay.
mate. Please. Because it's what you believe is 13
Dude,
bloodlines and whatnot. I'm
no,
not convinced of that.
Not me.
I'm not convinced
I'm
of
multiple
that.
people in this chat.
Okay, you and Skip are convinced of the
so-
13 bloodlines.
What about you,
I'm
Finn?
not.
What
If
about
I
you,
can jump
Finn?
in real quick, guys. Okay, like I am one of the least like New World Order people there probably is. Like I'm very like very non-conspiracy resident.
I think there were enough people disenfranchised with career politicians that somebody coming in and being completely batshit crazy actually was a turn on for a lot of people, because he said things that they wanted to hear, and he wasn't one of the normal Washingtonian elites, and they are a specific class. Believe me, they are a very specific class. I went to school with most of these people's kids, so I know how a lot of these kids think. And from a certain, it all changed at a certain age group as well. There was one set where everybody was fairly, I mean, it was elitist, but it wasn't like I own the world elitist. And then there was a certain group a few years below me where that all changed. And everybody was basically self-centered, had no respect for anything except basically how many Ferraris their father had or something along those lines. It was all status. And it confused the hell out of me how, like, that quick a generational, like 3 years was the difference for that to happen. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Where did these kids come from? And the fact of the matter remains, I know how a lot of these people think because I got their training. So they're not, it's not as straightforward as the 13 bloodlines, because there's a lot more bloodlines than that. There are a lot more forces at work than that. There are a lot more people with shit tons of money than that. And that is the point. Those people in power lose money. The heirs of dynasties tend to blow their dynastic wealth very quickly in very stupid ways. And that's just constant.
Still exist now that have always existed, and realistically speaking, you can trace this back for like at least centuries and millennia if you look at the places I've looked at. So
There are only
realistically
3.
speaking, the dynastic
There are only
wealth
3
exists right now, that has existed for a long time before the current level of historical understanding, which most people have, which basically stretches back to a little after the Civil War, and that's it. So, like, realistically, most of the people involved in this, they have things that have existed for a very long time, and additionally, let's be completely straight here. Their big ass houses, their ritual grounds where they worship Moloch, all of these things, they have like been built. They don't need to build anything else. They already exist, and these things already isolate their wealth. So these people don't need to worry about making more wealth. They've already got a system that provides them unlimited numbers in a computer system that everybody can give to them to, run the world. And they've got plenty of perfectly static wealth that they can use in like a long-term fashion for a very long time. The dynastic wealth used to be harder to spend because technology didn't let it be easier to spend. And it also used to be harder to save because the technology level did not allow it to be as easy as it is to save now. And in many ways now, it is so much easier for people to rule and keep that rulership that it's stunning. Like, and I'd like to hear what Skip and Finian have to say about this because we are about to have to close. But I think you underestimate the evils and the maintenance of that evils of these people. I think that's the case here. But what do you have to say, Skip?
I don't underestimate it.
Well, I started off with making the claim of the 13 bloodlines. That is a pretty commonly understood belief as far as the origins of the Illuminati and the New World Order and where all of that came from. I personally have not been at the doorsteps of the Bilderbergs or anything like that. I haven't gone Alex Jones on anyone. But what I will tell you is that I think that there's enough information there that people should be able to come to their own conclusion. And I know the conclusion I arrived at was that is exactly how they do select the people who are going to represent their interests. I'm not saying that Trump isn't an upset in what their plans were, because it is possible. But I am also of the belief that an electronic vote is no vote. And whether it's voter fraud or hacking by Russia or whatever, because all of those are claims that have been made. In the end, I do not see Trump as the savior of individualism. I have enjoyed seeing some of the triggering sessions and the beautiful, tasty, salty tears of a good number of the collectivists, but I am not ignorant of the fact that there are collectivists on the right that also want to see certain things done, certain Supreme Court justices put on the court and things like that. And so it's really hard to tell who he works for. I think that he is unpredictable enough that it is difficult for someone like me to be able to tell if he is actually, well, I hate to say friend or foe, because for me it's just foe or worst foe.
Frenemy.
Yeah, not even a frenemy.
Yeah,
I still shoot at frenemies. So I don't know. I can honestly tell you that I think it's really hard to tell if he's actually doing the bidding of these 13 bloodlines. Then he's doing it with such distraction by the media that that just makes it even more orchestrated and more evil than what I had originally thought. So
and to me, that's the main reason why I don't fully buy that he is part of the concerto. I think he is basically the violinist who suddenly jumped on stage with a guitar and has started trying to play some like Anthrax in the middle of a very nice piece from Holst. It's just he is basically total dissonance
no, he's
to
not.
what has been going on before.
Nope.
No, I'm with Jeremiah on this. I disagree, and the reason I disagree is because I think that there was another sitting American president that tried to do something similar and was escorted off stage left by way of a shooter at the grassy knoll.
Yes, he was, and that's probably why Trump has private security, as Finian already highlighted.
Yeah, that right there, you gotta focus on that. Like,
yeah,
why did that happen? And that's like a huge flag, basically. But I think and Trump has actually said things that back this up. He's said things like about North Korea's dictator, like, oh wow, I love how everybody just shuts up and listens to you. Maybe we need to do that in the Americas. He's a wannabe dictator, basically. And the intel agencies are freaking out about him because he's loving on Putin. Well, Putin, whatever he is, he's a strong guy, and he's supposedly done a lot of good things for Russia, but he's a dictator.
Yep.
So none of these guys are our friends, and it's just my opinion. But I think that Trump played a good game to get himself in there. So he fooled a lot of people basically to think that he was going to be a team player. Or that's what we're supposed to believe. And actually, he's playing the nationalist and playing an adversary on purpose because that's what they need to happen next to make this next transition occur. I don't think any of these guys are friends.
Keep in mind the RD cycle. Keep in mind the RD cycle has been happening for a very long time. And if you have Republican 8 years, Democrat 8 years, Republican 8 years, Democrat 8 years, I mean, it's always funny to tell people Bush, Clinton, Bush, because then they realize exactly how this works. So they already maintained the RDR structure that they've been going into for years. And it's at the very least a pressure relief mechanism for the right. But like beyond all of that, it has to be in like everything that I've seen, it has to be a show. And it has to be a show covering up the true shit happening.
It's more than that too. Like they're purposely either Trump's being told to do it or he's doing it on purpose, basically. But this whole move towards nationalism and actual outright fascism, and all these alt-right groups coming out and the fascist groups and people being killed over riots like in my city in Charlottesville, that's being done on purpose. I mean, that kind of stuff doesn't happen on accident. All these bad characters and all these bad movements are coming out of the woodwork. And basically, this gets back to the New World Order and the globalist crap. They want a civil war in the United States. And
we know
they keep pushing, they're going to get it.
We know for a fact Soros has funded Antifa on a number of occasions to do riotous actions and basically cause violence. He was affiliated with some of the things that happened at Berkeley. So one group basically was threatening to sue him for the amount of money they owed him, and they were a bunch of communists. Bear in mind, so they're getting used to the capitalist system, I can see quite well. And I'm not going to deny that there are active groups trying to instigate things, and they are part of the deep state, whatever that may comprise. I don't know which groups are involved. I don't think it's just 13 families. I think it's a lot more complex than that. Well, I think it's an oversimplification.
First off, let me be very specific. Skip, nobody here, Skip, nor myself, nor anybody said it was just 13 families. We just said 13 families are the spine of the operation. We didn't say that it was just that. And if we find more families, we'll add them to the list. He's got a list on Twitter. But beyond that, like if you start looking at this as well, Soros puppeteered like many Antifa and Occupy Wall Street and blah blah. Well, what about all of these institutions with a huge amount of cock money? What about all of these institutions with fucking Rockefeller and Rothschild money on the right? I mean, if you want to talk Soros, yeah, he's a danger. But let's really be specific here and say, if you want to say that it's not just 13 families, then I could say it's not just Soros and just leftist institutions. And
No,
this
I'm
isn't
not.
just, and hold on. And this isn't just an issue of Trump versus the deep state, because the deep state is fucking bipartisan.
Well, I know the deep state's bipartisan. That's part of the point, and I'm not claiming it's just Soros either, because there's a number of other agencies involved. A lot of them, things like SPLC. You've got I'm trying to think of what that one. I want to say EDF, but I know that's wrong.
SCIU, because you're still naming like leftist organizations partially funded by Soros. So what?
I'm trying to think. Okay, which ones are funded by Coach then? Because
Okay,
that's the go-to for the left on.
There's a huge amount
that side.
There's
Heritage Foundation as well.
There's a huge amount of right-wing money in organizations, even like Heritage, and there's also a huge amount of right-wing money in places like Independent, like fucking Prager, like fucking Turning Point USA,
Rand Corp.
Yeah, yeah.
And they don't even need somebody like Soros behind these groups, because groups like the Ku Klux Klan and Identity Europa and Vanguard America and all of these racist, alt-right, actual fascist groups that are coming out of the woodwork, they existed already. All that they're doing is they're creating an environment where these guys can step up and create the trouble that they want to have created. I'm in Charlottesville, so when that actual riot happened, the police stepped back, and the alt-right guys were armed to the teeth like militias, and they were actually, one of the guys actually opened fire and was shooting at somebody. Some of them were beating people in the heads with flagpoles, and the people that got killed like the Heather lady that got killed that day, she wasn't Antifa, she wasn't a communist, she wasn't no, crazy ANCOM or some shit. They were people in my city that didn't want a bunch of fascist racists there. So even that narrative is wrong. Like, people were there, arguing and defending the city and our reputation against people like the alt-right. So they're creating this division again on purpose, because they need some major conflict in the United States, because that's going to be one of the better ways to cover up what's coming. And that gets back to the economic collapse issue as before.
So I have a quote from Mike Lofgren, and I know that we're starting to run out of time, but I just wanted to read it to you. But before I read it, just American author, former Republican U.S. congressional aide, retired in 2011 after 28 years as a congressional staff member. He did a lot for the Republican Party, but he actually was quoted saying the deep state is a hybrid of national security and law enforcement agencies: the Department of Defense, the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Justice Department. I also include the Department of Treasury because of its jurisdiction over financial flows, its enforcement of international sanctions, and its organic symbiosis with Wall Street. So I thought I would mention that because we were talking about the deep state and whether it was a partisan or a bipartisan effort. I would also conclude that it is bipartisan.
I would argue it is bipartisan. I'd argue it's largely bureaucratic, because it is pretty much 90% civil service with a few lobbyists and key people within the international flow network, shall we say. The diagrams that go through Q-proofs and whatnot are quite complicated to link everybody together, but they are interesting reads, to say the least. And I'm not denying that there isn't a vast network of people that are basically trying to manipulate the world to benefit a select few. That is brutally obvious to anybody who wants to look at it. I just argue I don't know who the few are, and to be quite frank, trying to work it out is a bit of an effort and futility in some cases, because you could make a false accusation and then get sued for it.
Well,
so this is the problem.
So the first step. Okay, so I guess to sort of wrap this up, I'll start with the closing statements, and then I'll let everybody else give theirs. Let people know where they can find them. First off, everybody who can should follow Like a Creek, which is spelled OPELIKACREEK on Twitter. He's Conan, son of Conan. He was here earlier. Also, sarcasm_liberty, sarcasm liberty and liberty on Twitter. Also, follow Liberty Pro PI on Twitter. Follow the Free Rifleman on Twitter, and check out Loopin' It on Discord and on Minds and Steemit. But my closing statements, and please remember that this is from somebody who is severely pessimistic and cynical, like anybody listening, and I have anger issues, and I've been homicidal since I was 14, so this is the kind of insane rantings you're likely to find on this channel if you're new here. So, because I got an influx of subscribers recently, I almost have 500 now, so we're looking at possibly hitting that soon. And I would absolutely love anybody who's watching this too, or who watched this earlier, to like, share, and subscribe. You know, comment in the comments if there's anything you'd like us to cover, because we're going to do part 3 next week. We've already hit a lot of meaty things that we could sink our teeth into here, and it wouldn't surprise me if this show just becomes this, even though there are other subjects to discuss, because holy shit, there's a lot.
To be honest, I'd like a break from the New World Order for a bit, because to be quite frank, it is very doom and gloom. And when we go into this, it does feel like there is no hope and no way out. And we are all doomed, and therefore we should all just give up. And see, I don't believe that.
But see, here's the thing.
Cover that.
Yeah, and okay, so my closing statements are basically this. The elites have made a very, very convincing veneer of democracy, of republicanism, of hope, of peace, of serenity, of positivity, and of participation leading to good things, of basically optimism. And they have put this veneer over everything to get you and everybody that you love hooked up to the system umbilically. They've done this so that they can make absolutely sure that everything that happens in this country and around the world is something that they can profit off of, no matter which side of the binary something comes out on. Now, these people are mortal. These people fucking bleed. These people are people, you know? So remember that. Because there's always other options that fall outside of the predetermined binary that they profit off of. There's always options outside of that divide, and those options are what we can use to resist the New World Order. Those options are options we can use to fuck with globalism and to fuck with one world government. Those are what we can sink our teeth into and rip the flesh and the hearts and minds out of those who are fucking stealing from us, who are making us slaves and cattle and, you know, any other number of, you know, proverbially less than human things. Because the human spirit can and will prevail. It is strong within every single one of us, especially the disenfranchised, especially the downtrodden, and especially those who have been fucked over by the system the most. And these evil people want you to think that there is a very strong limitation on the future, because then they can keep you into this little pen and you will never leave. You will think you're free, but you will never leave their predetermined boundaries. And that is what we have to break, because fundamentally speaking, it is 13 families, but it's also many more. And it's also many other parties that have made sure that they have inserted themselves into this power matrix. And they're doing this very specifically to suck your soul out of your body. But that doesn't mean that you should be doom and gloom. It means that you should get mad and do something about this. It means that you should be ferocious at these motherfuckers. Start stocking up on your personal ammunition, whether that be mental, spiritual, or physical. Start learning how to defend yourself. and start realizing that in the end, the only thing you have is your meat suit and what it contains. And that's what they want you to forget, because they want you to think that all these peripherals exist and that all of these possibilities for ways to divert and delegate responsibility elsewhere are what you should be focused on. But if you remember that the power is in your fucking hands to end all of this, that's the power that they will sap from everybody, and that's the power that can kill them.
Well,
And so right now, I want everyone to go out to their window, and I want to open the window, and I want them to say, "I'm mad
I'm
as
mad
hell,
as hell, and I'm not going to take it
gonna
anymore."
Take it anymore."
Yeah.
I love that scene. But if you know, if you know the end of that film, think Jack Lemmon's in it, isn't it? He basically just shakes his head at everybody doing it because he knows what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, fear is like the worst motivator possible. Basically, when you're motivated by fear, you're very easily controlled, and that, of course, is the reason why all these people in power want us motivated by fear. I mean, it plays into their hands no matter what else happens. And following up on that, I would say, like, only focus on things you can control. I mean, we've talked about a lot of things tonight, but there are, your world and your little family and the people you love and your neighbors and friends, it's a pretty small world compared to what's really out there. Focus on that. Make sure that those people are informed. They'll survive. They're going to be warm. They're going to be fed. And, don't be divided by all these false left and right. Black Pilled is on YouTube, and he posted one of his most recent videos. He was talking about the left and the right, like the actual Republican, Democrat, communist, fascist thing. And I had to reply to him. I was like, look, what you're talking about doesn't exist. That's all a lie. You've been, basically blinded by this, and it's not the true balance. And of course, the true scale is individual liberty or not having it at all. And a lot of people responded to that. And that's the kind of thing that we need to be paying attention to. Don't be distracted by all these alt-right and communist and, we need to fight these people because they're a different skin color than us or they have a different religion. All of those things are controlling us through fear. And, you need to make sure that you're as aware as possible so that you're one of the survivors, so that when these assholes come out of their bunkers, they don't have farm animals left over living. They're going to have people that are going to take them to task for what they've done and make them pay for it.
I agree 100%. And I think that individualism versus collectivism is truly the real fight. I think that everything that the media, the social engineering, as I like to call it, that basically is designed to shape public opinion and draw on people's fears is exactly the controlling mechanism. I think the fastest way to really be able to see it is that if you were a person that sits and watches television and watches news specifically, I believe that is probably the number one manipulation technique that you're going to experience. And I think outside of that, it's going to be if you have discussions like what we just talked about tonight, and you have those discussions with friends, and you're one of those people that just goes with what everybody else says instead of thinking for yourself, then you are the manipulated that we're talking about. And I think that if you don't do the research, the due diligence, because it is your life, you have to take responsibility for it as an individual, and you have the responsibility to your future progeny to ensure their financial and freedom success. Because if they have no individual liberties, it was this generation, our generation's fault. And we just absolutely cannot succumb to that, because once it is extinguished, it is gone forever.
I'm going to give some advice on very quickly on what you can do right now if if you're in a good situation to do it. Number one, make sure you're not in debt. As soon as possible, pay off anything that you actually owe. For most of us, that probably will be a problem. For me, thankfully, I've been in a situation where I have no mortgage. I've got no major debts to speak of. The only thing I've got at the moment is a house that's currently waiting on the final bit of moolah to come in from the insurance. That's the number one thing you can do, is if you have your own place and nobody else to pay for it, you will be about at least 50% of the way there for most major situations that could occur. Depends on where you are, obviously, and if there's a global event, then you're screwed. But especially if it's something that's natural. But if it isn't, and it's something like an economic collapse, that's probably the number one thing you should focus on getting sorted for yourself as quickly as possible, or for your children. Because if they can't do it in that time, they're going to need something to fall back on. And that's, at the moment, from the New World Order perspective, there are people pushing for it, and I really don't think they're going to get it. The pushback is so extreme now, globally, that it beggars belief. You can look, if you look hard enough at most newspapers, most countries are fighting the idea that we all need to be homogeneously equal with each other, that we all need to have the same ways and the same beings, and all cultures are equally good. Nobody is really buying this except for the radical left. And unfortunately, the radical left has been educating most of our kids for decades. And it's created a lot of other radical leftists.
In some
but they're
places.
the ones in a fair number. In the ones that are slowly, that have come out of the communist areas, it's created radical capitalists, which is a lot more interesting to watch, to be honest. Particularly in places like the Ukraine and Romania. They learned the lessons that were taught by communism, and they learned them properly. So they know exactly how they can make the best of the bad situation, and that's to use the skills that they've got and to be individuals and to forge their own way forward. And the only way we can do this properly is to break the narrative of collectivism, that if we all work together, everything will be fine. Doesn't work if we all don't want to work together and we all want to work with only the people we trust, which is the best way of functioning. So, from my perspective, find something you do well, do it as hard as you can, and make sure that it makes you some money in the process so that you can put something aside for anybody who comes after you.
Agreed. And on that similar score, I think that's a relatively good place to wrap it up. Last week, I've sort of thought about it, and I think last week will be the third episode in the trilogy, and then we'll put it to bed until a reboot at some point a little bit later, even though everything is going to be tangentially related to the New World Order. So next week is going to be part 3 against the New World Order, and we'll be finishing sort of delving into it and getting some real good concrete solutions. I'll be seeing if I can pull in a decent grip of people who are not only into conspiracies, but don't just say it. They have a way to deal with it as well. So and not to say, of course, that the guests today didn't have things to do. They described a lot of very actionable solutions, but I want to get a full panel of people with really good ideas on how to proceed, and I think that we can do that next week. So I'm going to try and do that. If you want to be on the show, let me know. Additionally, this is part of my effort to build anarcho-coalitionism. I have a new banner on my profiles on Facebook and Twitter. If you just want to take that and run with it, they're slightly different on Facebook and Twitter because of layout, but you can find the one that works for your profile and use that if you want. And it'll be sort of a flag that we can all wave in the face of the elites that says we're not going to take it, and we're also going to work together to make sure that nobody else has to take it either. There are plenty of other solutions. If you'd like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/insanity is free, and it'll also support the future efforts of making this a 24-hour news network, because I've decided that I sort of want to do that too. So additionally, if you want to be an anchor on a daily news show, hit me up anywhere I am. You can just, Google Jeremiah Harding, and I'm the first result, apparently, which was fucking weird to find out the other day. But
You're popular.
I mean, hopefully not. I haven't done shit. Anyway, if you decide you want to be a co-anchor, let me know. Also, you can just comment, and I'll see if I can reach out to you in another way. But we could find like one or more days that works for you specifically, and we could see if that works into your schedule. Normally, it's at around 11 a.m. Eastern time, and I'm phrasing it that way for business, blah blah. Additionally, there are countless links in the description that you can, well, not countless, fucking a lot of them that you can use to support the show. Feel free to do any of that. I would be very grateful. And there are ways to donate. If you want to, let me know and I'll send you a link, because I use the Cash App, and it's not hard to go to cash.me/$Jeremiah Harding and donate whatever you want. But if you decide you want to do that, I will be extremely grateful, because I'm trying to save up for my moving costs in about a month. So if you want to help with that, I will be very grateful. Additionally, this happens every Sunday for those of you who are new here. Every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, there's a 3-hour stream. So there's going to be that. Also, the State Smash podcast. If you want to be a guest on that and discuss your anti-government projects, let me know, because that's what that podcast is for. If you've got something concrete that you're trying to do, hit me up. So without further ado, let's let people say who they are, where they can be found, and what they do, and we'll wrap up the show.
You can find me on Steemit, same account name that I'm using here, Finian. I also have a business account on Twitter under Liberty Pro PI. I have a residential security consulting and private investigation company in Virginia, and I look forward to more chats in the future. Thanks for having me on.
This is Skip, Collapsitarian. Also, I am at the Free Rifleman on Twitter. And you can also find me, my backup account is at Collapsitarian1 on Twitter.
And what about you, Lupinate?
Lupinate, you can find me on Minds and Discord as Lupinate, or on Steemit as Anarchic Wolf. And just to let you all know out there, if anybody fancies starting up a logic debates, I'm very keen to start having those at some point, particularly under a certain format, which I've come up with. So I'm looking for participants in basically a game show. So anybody who's interested in a bit of debate for an hour, then give me a shout on Discord in particular. I'll probably be able to find you quicker there.
All right, cool. And to every participant, either today or previously, thank you so much for showing up. This is what makes this conversation great, is having as many participants from as many varying perspectives as possible. And without this many perspectives, it could not be as great as it is. We probably wouldn't have had, an average viewership of 6 viewers all the whole stream, which if you guys do want to support the stream, one of the easiest ways you can do it is when it goes live, you share it. And there will also be plenty of videos relatively shortly that you can share as well. But thank you to everybody who makes this possible. Without you, I can't do it. Be well, everyone. Smash the state, fuck the system, and remember, you own yourself, and all the power to end everything we talked about is within you. Remember that, because they cannot strip you away from yourself.